Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
There's always a bit of a delay with this. The anticipation's unbearable.
I thought you were waiting for me.
No. I'm not going to waste my time doing that, Rob.
You're not that nice. You're not Chris Little nice.
Sorry, Evan. Sorry, just. Okay. So I just want to confirm that is us now in public session. So the meeting, just remind everybody, will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and also online. And for anyone in the public gallery, you're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and all devices are muted. You're also able to connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi, and the password details for that should be on the gallery rules, and it's not permitted to take photographs or record any of the meeting. So, welcome everybody. Item 1 is apologies. I've not received any apologies, and I think we have full attendance, so assuming nobody else has either. So that moves us on to item 2, Chairperson's business. I think you'll all agree there's been a lot of education business in plenary this week and more widely, and I think all of us here engaged in those debates in the chamber and at question time. I think all of us engaged in the debate on SEND transformation, and I think with our session with the departmental officials coming up where that issue will be covered, I think it's welcome that motion passed, and I think that gives us a good platform to scrutinise their work in this area. I'm also pleased to advise that the Minister has agreed to attend our meeting on the 18th of March. We can follow that up in more detail in the forward work plan, but it's definitely welcome to have the opportunity to hear from and question the Minister before recess. So we do have and that's at page 5 of your packs. Can I seek members' agreement that that's a complete and accurate record of proceedings? Is this agreed?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Sign those. Thanks. Okay, so we are just very quickly now going to move into closed session, so we can receive our introductory briefing from the Assembly Research and Information Service. So again, if I can just get confirmation when we've moved into closed session.
Sure, just for clarity, the 18th of March is a Monday.
Oh, sorry, is it the 21st of March? It's the week commencing the
21st,
18th of March.
okay.
Apologies, David. Well
Just checking, thanks.
spotted for the deliberate mistake.
Is that a bank holiday? The 18th?
18th
The
is
relevant date is
the
the 20th.
21st. It's the 20th.
20th.
It's
Yeah.
the week commencing the 18th. That's my mistake. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if we get off for Paddy's Day. That's what I'm asking.
Do, as far as I understand it, I think we do.
Go and sit on Monday.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound. Committee Room 29. 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 Sound. Committee Room 29, 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 Sound. Committee Room 29. 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 Sound. Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
He said it wasn't.
We're in public now.
Okay, members, so that's us back in public session. The next item in the agenda was to be the briefing from Employers for Childcare, but they're not in the building yet, so we are a little bit ahead of time. So I'd propose we do as we did last week, is move to correspondence. And there's quite a few items there that probably do need a committee decision on how we respond. So we'll go through those. What I propose to do, as is in previous weeks, is I've drawn out ones that I think need a committee response. We'll go through those. If there's anything at all I've missed that a member wants to raise, absolutely happy to do that at the end of that, and then other than that we'll take the rest on block for noting. Okay, so that's at pages 95 to 199 in your packs, and then there was also one late item of correspondence has come through in your tabled papers as well, so hopefully members have all of those. there's a summary note provided by the clerk as well at item 7.1. So I will going to propose items 7.3 and 7.9. So they are letters from Bernardo's and Action for Children on very similar themes, setting out their policy priorities and particularly those links between poverty and educational outcomes for children and young people. So I wanted to make a proposal and to see what you think. Would members be open to putting on perhaps an informal stakeholder event? I appreciate our time on Tuesday mornings is quite limited. Maybe one around that anti-poverty space and the link to educational underachievement, the impact of poverty on educational outcomes. Something maybe before summer recess, and it might be an opportunity to bring a range of stakeholders in, including Bernardo's and Action for Children. Would members agree to?
Agreed, yeah.
I'm just wondering, Chair, also could we get an update on the relevant minister on the anti-poverty strategy?
Is that something we can
Yes,
take
certainly.
forward? Yeah, thank you. Very happy to do that. Item 7.5, so that's correspondence from Gail Lynn on a couple of issues, and forgive me if my pronunciation is incorrect here, Skull Spraga scheme, and that's introducing the experience of Irish language into English medium schools, and also a piece of research on the state of play for Irish language as a subject in English medium schools. I know I certainly have had a briefing from Gail Lynn on both those items, and I think that they really would merit committee attention. So if members are agreed, they've suggested potentially an informal stakeholder event. Are members content that an invite is extended for when diary permits for that?
Yep.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you. Item 7.6 and then item 7.14. Again, I'm proposing we take these together. So we have the JNC and TUS Joint Secretaries, and then separately from the NIC and ICTU. So these are representatives from those non-teaching or educational support staff unions. I think given we had a very detailed briefing from the Northern Ireland Teaching Council on matters pertaining to the industrial action and industrial relations for teachers, I think it would be appropriate to invite both these to provide two separate. I think we could take it in one session, but two separate briefings to committee. Are members content we invite both of them to committee? Agreed.
Is it a main meeting, Chair? Or?
I think a formal meeting would be appropriate given the significance of that for the whole educational system. Yeah. Item 7.10, so that's then correspondence from Relate, and it's specifically on RSE. I'm assuming it's maybe on the back of our discussion on that at a previous meeting. Now, this is going to be covered in a bit more detail in the forward work plan. You will see that the clerk has suggested that maybe after Easter recess, that something comes back to committee with maybe a suggestion of the sort of stakeholders and maybe a bit of a plan as to who we engage with. On that basis, are members content that we respond to Relate to say that we'll absolutely be engaging with them in relation to that, but maybe we need to just take a look at that in the round before we put that finally into the plan. Members agreed?
Yep.
Okay, item 7.11, that's correspondence from the Secondary Students' Union of Northern Ireland and the Northern Ireland Youth Forum. And I think all members, without exception, expressed commitment for the committee to hear from young people and to prioritise their voice. Are we all agreed? Again, we can look at this at forward work planning, but I wondered whether it would be appropriate to try and factor in an invite to the Secondary School Students' Union and the Youth Forum at the meeting when the Minister is attending. We potentially have the mental health champion, and I think there's probably no better people to hear from in terms of what we want to question the Minister about than the children and young people. So are members agreed?
Absolutely.
It's a great idea.
Yeah.
On that, I think what would be really important to do with that is, it might be a job for the clerk, is to assess all of those youth advocacy groups to ensure that we're not excluding anyone. SSU and I and Northern Ireland Youth Forum are phenomenal, but we also have the Youth Parliament here. There might be a representative or two that might want to come from that, and if other youth community groups that have the status, I think if just to make sure that we do get as many and as broad a voice as possible, Chair.
Absolutely,
Okay.
I'm completely content with that, and I think as we discussed with the anti-poverty piece, I think there's probably scope for a full stakeholder event for children and young people, but conscious diaries the schedules are going to be stretched. Yeah, and sorry, I'll just bring Kate in quickly.
Sorry, at the risk of kind of opening this up for a list of everyone we'd like to see, I would just like to say maybe someone from Diverse Youth and we're going to be looking at newcomer children. I think it's important to have representatives from other communities as well.
Yeah,
Just
Robbie,
so that, I think actually it's probably remiss of some of us maybe not to pick it up at the start, that probably one of the first functions we should fulfil is to have a single event where we listen to young people. End of, that it's not. And so if it's, you can make a suggestion if you want to.
I was going to just say that. I think it seems like we're maybe moving towards, we need to organise an informal stakeholder event to bring all of those organisations together, and maybe a bit of a round table, or I think the phrase has sort of been used before, speed dating type event. I know that's a slightly old phrase, but to get members to round the tables, to speak to as many groups and hear as many voices as possible. So if committee's agreed, we can take that forward. Can I just check we're also agreed, given we have had a formal approach from Secondary School Students' Union and the Northern Ireland Youth Forum, that session when the Minister is here does feel appropriate still to have them in to get that youth voice heard for that meeting? Members agreed?
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, item 7.12, that's correspondence that's come in from Claire Hanna MP in relation to funding for St Malachy's Youth Centre and Longmore Road. Now, youth services have already been clearly highlighted by members, particularly yourself, Danny, in terms of a key priority. So I would want to suggest two actions maybe to take this forward. I think first, it seems like the situation's pretty pressing for them, so I would suggest if members are agreed, we could bring forward a piece of correspondence to the EA as a matter of urgency to get clarity on their funding situation for that youth centre. And to seek an explanation from the EA around the withdrawal of funding for their outreach programme. But second to that, if members are interested in it, we could offer the youth centre an offer of a visit from some members of the committee, diary permitting.
Yeah, I suppose you could probably open that up to all the community and voluntary sector. I'm guessing that's from the two correspondents last 2 weeks, where they're going with it was at 22-23, the community and voluntary sector used to have a 136,000 specification. That was then dropped in 22-23 to 96. Then there was collaborative specifications that went out there, almost like I was saying it last week, not that it was exactly a cut, but more of a slice of the pie of the community sector. No, it went out to different specifications. And then there's probably a bigger problem. You seem to mention the correspondence as well, it wasn't just about their funding, it's also about the maintenance of their buildings. So all the community and voluntary sector as well are facing this, where they've had no uplift. So cost of living crisis has really kicked in after that budget was set for the specifications, including energy costs and all gone up. So they're having to find that. One of the ones I volunteer in, actually, just before Christmas, we had to close for 2 nights consecutively because we couldn't afford to run it because of the oil. Yes, have the correspondence with them, but I think they're probably represented by Youth Work Alliance anyway, so I was going to suggest it probably fits in nicely to hear the funding model that they're talking about for the committee, but also then you'll hear all the problems when it talks about maintenance, capital and all that, because you wanted to get it on par with the statutory bodies as well. And then wages will come into this as well. They're not getting probably the uplift the same as what their counterparts are in the statutory sector of it. So there's loads of issues with it, and I'm just guessing that's what this is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you're probably right on that, Danny. I think you probably know more about the detail of the funding picture than I do, but I think it's important that all of us get the opportunity to learn some of that stuff. So on that basis, would we be content that we get a piece of correspondence away for this individual youth centre, but when we have the EA in, there's probably some, I think, substantially more detailed work we need to do around funding for the youth sector once we've heard that from, I think, specifically the Youth Work Alliance can help us.
I do think that outreach one is in specifications that haven't even been released yet. That's that other wee bit of collaborative work. So I'm still hopeful that is going to come out and they will be able to tap into it, and that's for all of them. But I think
let's hope that's the update we get then. Yeah, that's great. Are members agreed then on that basis? Yeah. Okay. So items 7.15 and 7.16, I'm going to suggest to take elements of these together as they both sort of cut across integrated education. If I can just take 7.15 first, just in terms of the business of the invite, and then I think maybe there is linkage with Millennium Integrated Primaries letter and the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee letter. Item 7.15 is a letter from the chair of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee inviting the committee to attend Hazelwood Integrated College as part of their inquiry into integrated education, and that's on the 11th of March. I think it's a really good opportunity for the committee to engage with that inquiry. I'm certainly very happy to respond to say that I'm able to attend. Are any other members keen to get to Hazelwood for that?
Yeah.
Kate, you've indicated. Is anybody else? No.
I think it's a party meeting morning, but it would be a useful one given what has happened.
I think
in
given the
last-
wider context to have committee representation there. I mean, I'm happy members maybe confirm via the clerk who has availability, but certainly to confirm that we can
Yeah, I'd be
attend.
available for that.
That's great. I think a good attendance and that would be really appreciated by the integrated sector. Item 7.16, it's a letter from Millennium Integrated Primary in Saintfield from their principal. I do just have to declare an interest in this item as my wife is a teacher at that school. But I think given the significance of the issue, both for that individual school and more widely, I think it is very important the committee does respond. So it's clearly really significant for that individual school. They were, I think, probably the closest school to completion out of the 10 that lost Fresh Start funding. We'll all have seen the Minister's letter to the Secretary of State that came out this week in relation to Fresh Start. So I have a couple of things I want to suggest on this. The first is the committee first of all agreed that we write to the Secretary of State and ask that they that the UK government urgently take steps to undo the damage caused by their decision to reprofile Fresh Start. And also is the committee content, as the Minister's letter did, that we highlight Millennium specifically as well as the 10 other schools, just given how far advanced their project was? Is the committee agreed on that?
Right.
Okay. I want to just tie this item into the letter from the inquiry. I think there might also be mileage if the UK government are running an inquiry into integrated education, but on the other hand appear to have lifted a lot of money or certainly reprofiled money that's had an impact on integrated schools and shared education also. Would the committee be content that we also write to the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, maybe just to provide them with a copy of our correspondence to the Secretary of State so that they can consider that in their inquiry? I think that would be helpful. And then the final bit, I'm just conscious we probably need to try and cover this as broadly as we can. Would the committee be content of also seeking an update from the Minister of how he's going to protect investment in these schools as well, and cover that from all three angles?
Agreed.
Agreed. Robbie, you wanted to come in?
I think it's really important. There will obviously the Struhl campus has been spoken about, and hopefully something concrete will come with that. But we have long-standing issues here, and there are audit office reports in regard to projects failing to be completed, and it's really important that we see ring-fenced money used, but we need to see literally spades in the ground, because we know that Millennium fell foul of the fact that there were to be spades in the ground in 2022 and it didn't happen. And then so what would be really unforgivable is if these projects, even if we were to do the work now but the spades weren't to get in the ground. So there's obviously a piece outside of what we do with the procurement process and stuff, and maybe to ask the Minister in regard to that to provide some robust evidence. We work with the Minister on it to see that these things do come to fruition. But from the last mandate, guys, there was the Minister for Education at that stage revealed an ambitious build plan of something in the region of £798 million at the end of that last mandate. So that sits out again from what we're talking about today. And then there's, I just don't know
I would agree.
what the picture looks like in totality.
There's a wider piece around how we deliver capital projects across Northern Ireland, but within education specifically. So I think we can certainly, I'm very content to raise that in the letter, but I wouldn't want to lose focus on just the live issue around Fresh Start and this particular piece here. And we do have officials coming in from the department around the infrastructure side, and we'll have opportunity, I think, to question that. But I've no issue with the wider capital stuff being included if members are agreed. Okay, so that's an agreement. We've got 3 pieces of correspondence, I think, arising out of that, and hopefully that can reassure some of the schools impacted by that cut in funding that the committee is going to do everything it can to make the case that investment is protected for them. And I think it's clear from the principal's letter from Millennium just how devastating that was for the school community. Obviously, I have a personal connection to it through my wife's employment, but also as the local constituency MLA for that school. I think they really feel the rug was pulled from under their feet at the 11th hour. It was really, really devastating for them. Okay, thank you for everyone for rattling through that so quickly. that's everything that I wanted to draw out of correspondence. Was there any other items of correspondence anybody else wanted to highlight? No. Okay, so our members agreed that other than the items we've discussed with actions arising, that we note the remainder of the correspondence at item 7. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. So, Clerk, have we
have
have our
some
witnesses in the Great. So if you're able to bring through the representatives of employers from childcare, please. So that means we just are going to track back on our agenda back to item 5, and this is evidence session and oral briefing from employers for childcare. So we'll just wait for them to be brought through. While we do that, there's a briefing paper from the committee clerk at page 52, and then a briefing paper provided by employers for childcare at pages 53 to 63 of your papers. So, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You're both very, very welcome. It's great to have you here at committee today. So I want to just introduce, we have Marie Marin, Chief Executive for Employers for Childcare, and Aoife Hamilton, Consultant for Employers for Childcare. Absolutely delighted to have you here. The committee was very clear from the outset that we were mindful of what a critical priority early years and childcare is and needs to be across the executive over the course of this mandate, and we really are delighted to have you here and to be able to hear from you. So we're allocating up to 10 minutes for initial presentation, and then that should hopefully leave us time for question and answers afterwards. I'm going to try and stick to the 10 minutes for the presentation, so we may need to speak quickly, but I do want to make sure that we have the time to get into the question and answer session afterwards. So it's over to both of you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you today, just a few weeks after the formation of the committee. It's obviously reflective of the priority that you're placing on early learning and childcare, and that is very welcome. So I'm Mary, I'm the Chief Executive of Employers for Childcare, a charity and social enterprise which I founded more than 25 years ago, which gives you an indication of my vintage. I'm here with my much younger colleague Aoife, who was head of our charity services for more than 6 years and now works with us as a consultant. And I recognise some very familiar faces around the table, members whom we've obviously worked with very closely for the last number of years through the APG. And there are others that I would really like to get to know and we would like to consult with more broadly in the next wee while. So just to summarise very quickly, Employers for Childcare helps parents with dependent children to get into work and to stay in work. We address childcare as a labour market issue, as an economic issue, as well as a social and educational one. We've carried out the Northern Ireland Childcare Survey since 2010, making it the longest running and most comprehensive study into the experiences of childcare providers and parents. Each year, our Family Benefits Advice Service, which is like a Citizens Advice Bureau, supports tens of thousands of parents, childcare providers and employers, and we also provide the Secretariat for the APG on early education and childcare. Our work is robust and evidence-based, and it is informed by the research as well as the views of our stakeholders. And you have a written briefing today with information on the key points that we will be highlighting. By way of background, I set up Employers for Childcare a quarter of a century ago. Please just think about that for a moment. I was a single parent experiencing firsthand the struggle of trying to find affordable childcare that would allow me to work. My sons are now old enough to have children of their own, and yet we are no further on. In fact, the situation has worsened beyond what any of us could have imagined. Early learning and childcare in Northern Ireland today can be characterised as unaffordable, both for parents to access and for providers to deliver. We have a workforce crisis in terms of recruitment and retention. For far too many, it is not available or accessible. The quality of the childcare is at risk, and it is insufficiently integrated or family-centred. On cost in particular, the sums just don't add up. In the continued absence of government investment, parents and childcare providers are required to pick up the pieces to privately fund a sector that should be recognised as a public good. The most recent childcare survey, which we did, revealed the average cost of a full-time place was £10,000 a year per child, for one child. We had families who responded who were paying over £30,000 a year, and one parent told us that their family had paid over £200,000 for childcare in the last 12 years. That is more than the average price of a house in Northern Ireland. So no wonder parents report that they're paying more for their childcare than they are for their mortgage. And no wonder women particularly are leaving the workforce in their droves. Parents are turning to credit cards, savings and even payday loans. They aren't paying into their pensions and they're stopping work altogether to reduce their childcare costs. So as well as the impact on the family finances and on the economy, if we think about what this committee is all about, there's also the impact of the children who are missing out on the benefits of quality early education and childcare. I would say to you that this cannot continue. Last week I came across an article where I was at Stormont organising an event called Lifting the Childcare Barrier. There's a great photograph of several of us standing down on the hill there at the barrier. I was standing alongside Eileen Bell of the Alliance Party, who was the former Speaker of the Assembly. That was in 2003. We are now in 2024 and we are talking about exactly the same issues. Now, what does feel more positive now, though, is compared to back then, all parties, it seems to us, recognise clearly that childcare is essential infrastructure and an ambitious investment is required. In Employers for Childcare, we've been using the term infrastructure to describe childcare for many years, and it is great to hear that getting back now is business groups, politicians, parents and in the media, they're all using the term infrastructure. So there is clearly a drive and a commitment for meaningful change. And what IFAS is going to focus on today is what that change needs to look like. Thank you.
I will be as quick as possible. I thought we had a few more minutes, but I'm going to start just with the vision set out in the Department of Education's Every Child corporate plan, and that is that every child and young person is happy, learning and succeeding. And I think if we can achieve that with what we're setting out in our proposals, we will have done something really significant. Guiding principles for those we felt were that early learning and childcare proposals need to start early. Early intervention is key, as is quality. So the evidence shows that high quality childcare is what delivers the greatest educational benefits. For that we need trained, experienced and qualified staff, and this has to be affordable for every family, irrespective of their circumstances. So we've put together proposals that we believe will deliver that. We've used learning from international evidence locally and knowledge of our own strengths in Northern Ireland to set out a model. It's set out in your briefing. We put the model on page 8, but we've included 4 essential pillars for a financial affordability scheme, and I'm going to focus on the second of those pillars just today. This is a universal subsidy for early learning and childcare. So we propose funding for registered providers to cover a portion of their overall costs. This would enable them to reduce the fees they charge for all provision, for every hour of childcare, and it would rebalance the way in which early learning and childcare is funded in Northern Ireland. How this would work: government would pay a subsidy to each early learning and childcare provider on the basis of how many places they're registered for. In return for that, conditional, the provider must reduce and cap all parental fees. They must uplift staff salaries, terms and conditions in line with the workforce strategy, and deliver high quality provision. What it does is recognises early education and childcare as public infrastructure. High quality and affordable early learning and childcare is the result that can be accessed by everyone, giving children the best start in life. I'm going to quickly run through the benefits of that. For parents, they're supported to work, but also to work flexibly and to increase their hours of work without an arbitrary cut-off you might see with an allocation of free hours. There'd be no complicated application process. The savings would apply right across the year. Research from the Institute of Fiscal Studies shows that childcare subsidies, if they're to make the greatest impact on parental employment, need to support flexible provision, so they can't be rigid, they can't be just term time. They need to be full-time or as close as possible. They need to apply to the mother's youngest child to enable the mother to get back into work. So that's what we're proposing, flexible, all hours and all ages. From our scheme, all providers would benefit from stable, guaranteed funding. They could invest in quality and in their staff. Children would be benefiting from quality early learning and childcare, and we would envisage targeted subsidies to support access for children with additional needs or from a disadvantaged background. And employers will benefit immediately. This will help more new parents to return to work following the birth of a baby, and we will see parents able to afford the childcare they need right across the year to work. We considered a lot of options, as we know the committee and the department will have been looking at. We looked at the UK and Ireland. We found issues with schemes in both of those jurisdictions. So in Ireland, while the core funding model does provide a subsidy, as we're recommending, it includes very few registered childminders, who are a core part of our infrastructure here. And we do have serious concerns about the 30 hours free childcare model in England. I'm going to briefly run through those, because it's a model we know that is being costed. That's why I want to focus briefly on that. So it's a scheme that has not been adequately funded, and that means many providers haven't actually signed up to it, making childcare more difficult for some families to access. Providers who are signed up are under real financial pressure as a result. They're having to subsidise the underfunding themselves, so it's actually driven up costs for those not using the free hours or for families who need additional hours. In phasing in the scheme, it's been made particularly difficult for families with the youngest children, which is arguably when most support is needed. It has increased inequality for disadvantaged children, and it doesn't actually deliver 30 hours right across the year. It doesn't support parents in training and education, such as trainee nurses, of whom we have a shortage, or in volunteering, and it's not as progressive as other schemes in supporting parents into employment. It does nothing to improve pay, terms and conditions for those working in the sector, and it has been poorly implemented, with parents having issues signing up. And this is born out of research from a range of organisations in England, including the National Daycare Association, Early Years Alliance and Pregnant Then Screwed as well. So it's not delivering on its objectives. That doesn't mean there's no merit in learning from it, which is what we've sought to do. It certainly has the capacity to improve affordability for some, but if we don't get it right, it's at what cost? So I want you to imagine government introduces a scheme similar to this. And let's imagine the parents who are currently paying £2,000 a month. Instead of seeing a fee reduction, they see an increase in their fees. Or because of settings closing or being at capacity or opting out of the scheme, they can't actually access the childcare that they need. You know, if we introduce a scheme and providers who've been propping up the system at crisis point for years find they're being underfunded to deliver it, what are we going to say to them? Or those working in the sector who were still being paid the minimum wage because of underfunding? So we don't want that to be this government's legacy of implementing the wrong model. It's too important an issue, and we've waited too long to accept anything other than real ambition and significant investment. So we don't want to see a system that diminishes quality or value of our early learning and childcare. So we've come up with something that we see as more progressive. It's a bespoke model to support all families without a drive to the bottom in terms of quality or funding. And importantly, it can help more families achieving better educational outcomes for children with no more funding than a free hours model. It's just a different way of applying that funding. Coming close to the end, but I do want to pick up on what now and what we're asking of this committee. So what we need to know now is, what is the timeline for the new early learning and childcare strategy? What are the costed options that have been in development for so long and we still haven't seen? How will the sector, families and other stakeholders continue to be engaged as we progress to getting that new strategy? So we would hope you would be able to seek an answer on those. And when scrutinising any response, use the evidence that we share and that we discuss today. But we also know the new strategy isn't going to happen overnight, certainly not if we're getting the right strategy. But overnight is when we could see more closures of childcare settings. And more parents forced out of work or into reducing their hours. And we cannot state enough the devastation that this would have on children in terms of their opportunities, on families, and actually on the ability of any government department to achieve its objectives. More than 40% of our workforce in Northern Ireland are parents with dependent children. I tried doing anything if 40% of the committee wasn't here. So this is a real issue. So we need immediate action. In less than 5 weeks, childcare providers' costs will increase significantly due to the increase in the national living and minimum wages. Wages are around 3/4 of group providers' costs. We spoke recently with a provider anticipating increased salary costs alone of £66,000 as a direct result of these uplifts. Without immediate intervention, inevitably these costs are going to be passed on to parents. And in some cases, we know they already have been. Our team that Mary referred to, the Family Benefits Advice Service, day and daily they're speaking with parents who've seen their fees go up, sometimes hundreds of pounds a month, thousands of pounds a year. And already that's on top of bills that were just unaffordable. So with parents and providers already at breaking point, to stem a hemorrhaging of parents from the workforce, the closure of settings and the loss of educational opportunities for children, as we wait the new strategy, we need to see 4 things. We need stability funding for the sector. We need to see something similar to the funding that was recognised as essential during the COVID-19 pandemic. This could be rolled out quickly, conditional on providers not increasing fees for parents, or if they've already done so, returning them to their previous rate. We know this is a short-term measure, but it could at least prevent settings closing and fee increases and give a baseline for the longer-term affordability scheme to be rolled out. We need to see childcare settings removed from the requirement to pay rates, as is already the case in other jurisdictions like Wales and Scotland. We need to see an expedited review of the minimum standards and take steps to remove current barriers to recruitment into the sector, and continue welcome cross-party support, calling on the UK Chancellor to remove the current cap on tax-free childcare and increase the allowance for families in Northern Ireland.
So, in conclusion, what we would say is obviously since the restoration of the Northern Ireland Executive, there's been a welcome focus on childcare, and the level of commitment to addressing this issue from our political leaders gives a strong sense of optimism. What we would say is that optimism alone isn't enough for the parents and childcare providers who are at breaking point, and words alone are not enough. Please let us not squander another 25 years. Let us do something now that is going to make a difference and a legacy and a future achievement of a really, really important childcare strategy for Northern Ireland, for this jurisdiction. Thank you.
Thank you. And you did well on your timing. I know you had a lot to get through. Maybe not quite 10 minutes, but not far off. So that is appreciated. Look, thank you both for your presentation and for your time this afternoon for the committee. We do want to make it very clear that this is a real priority area of work for us. So it is great to have you here. And I think there's quite a few of us around the table here sit on the all-party group on early education and childcare. And I think sometimes when you attend that group regularly, sometimes the stark nature of the challenge can be lost on you because you discuss it so regularly. And I think it's really important to have you here so that some of this stuff is out on the public record in terms of the nature of the challenge, because I think as elected reps you can maybe get a little bit sort of insulated from it because you hear it all the time. So it's really, really helpful to have heard from you. And I think it's just important to say that APG really does great work, and your secretariat support for that is exemplar. I think it's just an example of just how well an APG can function when you get really good stakeholder buy-in. So I think it is important to note that. I just wanted to ask a couple of things because I think it's such a big area and a lot of members have indicated already, so I don't want to hog too much of the talk space. First of all, just on there's the whole long-term piece which we're all clear on, I'm sure we'll cover. In terms of that immediate challenge that you highlighted, really that risk around with the minimum wage uplift coming in, which is a welcome change for society, but appreciate it creates real challenges for providers. Can you give us a sense of what level of investment you think would be required if we maybe even compare back to what was done during COVID times to make a meaningful intervention in that space?
Yeah, so during COVID-19, the amount that was invested in the sector was around £40 million. That was over a number of different schemes, some of which were targeted at sustainability. So they provided a core element of funding to settings on the basis of their registered numbers to help them through the pandemic. Another part of the scheme was targeted at settings who had to close or maybe had a pod closure because of COVID. So we think that potentially something up to and in and around that, but it will depend on how long we need to wait until we've got a new affordability scheme in place. But in essence, this is a good model to build on for that, and at least it keeps a steady state, a very difficult and challenging steady state, but one that wouldn't get worse in that time.
And to be clear, that immediate intervention, you would want that to build in those principles of what the scheme would look like on a longer term basis. So around the conditionality attached, you would hope that if that was built in, could be a stepping stone then.
I think that would be very important, yeah, because not only has it got to support the sector, we don't want to see closures the way we have quite recently. I mean, we saw a setting in Lisburn closing, and 60 families, wasn't it, are now looking for childcare. But importantly, parents are really struggling as well. We don't think it's realistic to target a scheme directly at parents. There would be so many variables involved in that. But this is a way that we can recognise that this childcare infrastructure is at crisis point, and it's only going to get worse if we don't step in and do something.
That's really helpful, and we have officials coming in after you who we can maybe raise some of those immediate pressures with. The only other question I have is just specifically around special educational needs provision or children with disabilities. You briefly mentioned how that can present a very particular challenge for parents in terms of accessibility of childcare. Can you give us an insight into how you would foresee any scheme that might be rolled out, just how we could build in provision that works for parents of children with special educational needs and disability?
So one of the pillars, we see 4 pillars. In many ways, all of those 4 pillars should be supporting all families, including those who have a child with additional needs. But one of those pillars should be particularly targeted around additional subsidies to support providers if they perhaps need additional staff members to bring in place so that they can support children with additional needs if they need to make changes to their settings. So that needs to be a targeted subsidy directly to support that access. There should be no situation where a family, because they happen to have a child with additional needs, can't access quality early learning and childcare that is appropriate to their needs.
That's really helpful, thank you. So had a few indications. Kate had indicated first, and then I'll go through them just in the order I received them. So there we go. Kate.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much for your presentation and the really important work that you're doing in this area. I'm childcare and early years spokesperson for my party, and so it's something that I'm really focused on. Just yesterday, I got a message from a constituent whose childcare bills have gone up by £120 this month, and we know that we're going to see an increase with the welcome increase in minimum wage, but which is being passed on to providers, and we know that's going to be passed on to parents. I support the bespoke model. I've looked at the research. The 3 hours model it quite clearly doesn't work to me. One of the biggest criticisms, though, that we receive around the supply side scheme is that you're giving money to private companies, and I'm quite quick to say that, well, if we were designing systems from scratch, it wouldn't necessarily look like this. Can you just explain maybe a little bit more about how you would counter that? And then also if you could touch on childcare as an anti-poverty mechanism, because I think we do focus a lot on working parents, and that's right, and that is really that's really captured the media narrative, but just how it's also an anti-poverty tool as well would be useful.
Yeah, so actually there's a lot of sectors where we would see government investment into private businesses where that's recognised as a key part of infrastructure. So we do have a sector here which is made up of private, voluntary, community and public providers. They're essential parts of our infrastructure. So for the government to step in and say, well, yes, we are going to invest in that, what they're then able to do is say, well, we also have a stake in quality. We also have a stake in ensuring that the people who are working in this sector are being paid appropriately, that they've got good terms and conditions. That's really important. We don't just want to see a childcare infrastructure where we focus on affordability to the detriment of all of those things, and instead we're seeing a kind of race to the bottom. So this is the creation of more of a public-private sector partnership model. It's what we've seen in other parts of the world, including in Ireland, where they've created this kind of approach. They are taking more of a partnership approach to that. So we think it's a strong recognition from government to be able to step in and say, we value this, we see this as a public good, as infrastructure, so we are investing. But with our model then we also see a dual, a kind of core co-payment. So parents are also contributing to the cost of early learning and childcare. And we think that that's appropriate in certainly the short to medium term. Longer term, we may want to look at a different model, but for now that would certainly do a lot to achieve the objectives we've set out. In terms of the anti-poverty mechanism, I think this is a really strong point. We published a paper in January and it was called Tackling Disadvantage Through Childcare. And really, the objectives for working parents and for tackling disadvantage are very much the same, because actually if we're supporting parents to get into, to stay in and progress in work, that's a key route out of poverty also. It's a key way of tackling disadvantage, but it also gives us scope to identify early if maybe there are additional needs for children. That can be done really effectively within quality early learning and childcare settings. So we do sometimes hear this argument, if we focused on working parents only, that's a better use of funds. It's actually a really false economy. The majority of parents in Northern Ireland are working, and proportionately more parents in Northern Ireland are working than in other regions of the United Kingdom. So parents want to be able to work. We have very low levels of unemployment. Where parents aren't working, it's typically they're economically inactive because of caring responsibilities or because of a disability. So if we can make sure we target a scheme that supports their transition, whether it's through volunteering, through education, training, into the workplace, that's the much more progressive scheme to actually support people into work. And the Institute of Fiscal Studies research was very clear on that, and it's why with the 30 hours scheme in England we haven't seen a significant impact on parental employment levels, because they haven't got the targeting right for this. And if we start with tackling disadvantage and addressing poverty, that's actually a really good way of supporting working parents.
Thank you.
Apologies, Deputy Chair made me aware I missed an indication there earlier, so I'm going to bring, I know it's my error entirely, I'm going to bring Cathy in, and then I think Cara we have next.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair. I suppose I want to begin by thanking the Employers for Childcare, because with this being my brief as well, I know the research and the work that you guys do, and you mentioned some of the statements and things that you released, and I know that the work that goes into those with the statistics and that you provide, but also the engagement with us as political reps. And I think, Nick, you mentioned through the APG, it's the work that's done there is fantastic. I think it's important to note, the work that Nicola Brogan does there as the chair as well. It's fantastic. And I do welcome that you are here so early on in the committee as well. Like you say, it does show the priority that this now is, and we would like to see that continue. And I actually want maybe to make a proposal that during some of maybe the informal briefings that we have, that we listen or maybe get in some of the parents and childcare providers as well, till we get a good clear indication of how the sector is dealing with things at the minute.
Certainly pick that up at the end of the briefing to take that forward
Thanks,
formally.
We've had a chance, I suppose, to see your briefing in detail as well, and there's so many things that we could pick up on and have a discussion around, but there's 3 or 4 things that I'd just like to pick up on. I think one of the most staggering statistics for me in your briefing was about 88% of parents having to change their work patterns and due to childcare costs and arrangements. And I hate using the term economically inactive, but the high levels that we do have here in the north of people who would like to be in work. I was just wondering, is there any sort of comparison in terms of economic projections between the English, I suppose, childcare model and the model of free hours and this bespoke model that we are proposing here, just in terms of workforce employment and maybe more specifically around gender based employment as well. Second thing is, we all know we've been waiting for so long on this strategy to be developed, and I suppose it's to get an indication from you guys, what are the implications, what will we be facing if we don't see this strategy. I know we need to get it right, but we also need to get it quickly as well. You mentioned, Marie, the Family Benefits Advice Service, and I was just wondering if there's any indication, has there been an uplift in it recently, just due with the pressures that families are facing, and is there any correlation with maybe more disadvantaged areas picking up on that as well? And it's been mentioned before about the crisis that we're facing in childcare now, and it's clear that a lot of it is coming down to the pressure that is being put on our providers, and we know that there's more pressure coming down the line with the rise in the national and living wage as well. And I know you have your recommendations as urgent intervention that's needed. Is there, out of those interventions, is there any of those that would have the most benefit in the real short term, something that could be delivered quickly but would have the most impact? So sorry, that's a question fired at you.
You want to take it first?
I'll maybe ask for future questions.
Longer than my presentation.
maybe limit it to 2 questions.
Oh, my
next time.
questions.
Yeah, maybe if we take those in turn. So
Yeah.
the economically inactive, and I appreciate exactly what you say about the term, Kathy. So yes, we know, I think we put this here, so we know there's around 31,000 economically inactive women in Northern Ireland who would like to be in work, and 35% of those are inactive due to family care and responsibilities. So we've calculated out that's 11,000 women, and that's only looking at women. If we could address the barrier that is childcare that's preventing them from getting into work, that would be really significant for them, for their families, and of course for our economy. So that's certainly something that we would expect to see as a result of the right scheme. We have included some information where in England there has been some analysis done of the impact of the schemes there. So the PwC and Salvation Army, for example, they did a comparison of the scheme when it was brought in England versus in Scotland, where there were some differences but quite similar jurisdictions to work with. And they found that in the first year alone it had driven a 286,000 increase in labour force participation in the first year after implementation. So that is significant. Proportionately, we would certainly expect to see at least that in Northern Ireland, but we really do want this to be the right scheme. The scheme that we perhaps would most compare it with would be in Ireland. We know there's issues with that, which is why we've suggested a bespoke model, but we know in Ireland that it's a newer scheme, so some of this modelling hasn't been done, but the Irish government is reporting that by next year parents' fees will have reduced overall by around 50%, and what that will mean is that Ireland will have seen the fastest decrease in net childcare costs in the OECD. So that's a significant shift for them, and modelling does show a positive impact on supporting women to move into work. It's something that we think there's probably more work needs to be done, but it can be difficult without a scheme in place, because you're asking people for what their plans would be. For some women who say they aren't interested in moving back into work at this stage, it could be also because of the constrictions of limited childcare. So we might actually see that 11,000 increasing if they knew there was quality childcare that they could avail of. So significant potential there, and that would certainly go towards addressing some of the skill shortages also that we're seeing across different sectors within Northern Ireland. I think you'd asked about the Family Benefits Advice Service as well.
Happy to pick up on that. So the Family Benefits Advice Service is basically like a citizens' advice bureau for working families and working parents. So we don't deal with elderly people, and we don't deal with single men or women. It's funded entirely by the work of our organisation, by our social enterprise, and we have a contract to deliver some services through the Health and Social Care Board, which covers a small part of the cost. Our staff deal with people on the phone and in community settings right across Northern Ireland, and we go on to employer sites. Now that's a very important aspect of it, because so many people who are working think that then they are not entitled to any benefits. And if I had a penny over the last 25 years for every person that I'd met who said that they wouldn't be entitled to it, I wouldn't have to be working at all. But so many people literally rule themselves out. And I've just seen just this week advertised on TV, I think it was yesterday, the Call campaign, where people are being encouraged to ring in and make sure they're getting the benefits. We are having calls and dealing with people every day of the week, and our staff are identifying benefits that they did not know that they were entitled to get, and it is £1 million a month over the last 12 months. £1 million every month for the last 12 months. Please think about that. And I'm also going to tell you something else which makes me feel really, really old. It's the theme of my conversations today. But I presented that same information, not the £1 million, because that's in the last year. But I presented this information when Jenna from Cannes was on the committee, and many, many moons ago, around in one of these rooms. This has been going on for an awful long time. So many people in Northern Ireland, you hear them talk about the cost of childcare. You hear them talking about this, which is very real, but they are also losing out on in-work benefits that they do not know that they're entitled to get. Our team, I'm very, very proud of the team that we have who are helping people to identify that every day of the week. So I wouldn't say, Kathy, that it is any more now than it has ever been. It is, but it is continuous. And I'm going to say that number again. It's £1 million every month for the last 12 months.
Since that team was set up, it's identified £105 million in support that your families didn't know that they were entitled to. And as Mike says, we've probably always been very careful within that team. We go out to Sure Starts. Yes. We would try and go to places where we can target and identify people who might need that support, maybe coming from a more disadvantaged background, just as we could be out in Allstate or in Coca-Cola. We'll go anywhere really to do that service. The other thing I think you'd said, Kathy, was about the 88% of people who had said already they'd changed their working patterns, and absolutely that figure, will only increase, I think. But also looking ahead, 11% said that they were considering leaving their employment because of the cost of childcare. So they made that specific link, and of course, as costs go up, ahead of probably what people's wages are going up, I think that figure is only going to increase as well, and it affects all sectors, but certainly public, private, education, healthcare, all of those sectors are going to be affected by this. And I think the economic inactivity rates that we have in Northern Ireland at the moment, high as they are probably artificially low, because as I said earlier, proportionally more parents in Northern Ireland are working, or they're trying to hold on, and we can't ask them to do this anymore given the level of what they're expected to pay in order for the privilege of doing their day's work.
Just the last one was just around that. Sorry, Chair, the urgent intervention.
The urgent
out of those
intervention, what would be the most important?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the greatest impact could be delivered through getting funding directly into the sector. I think it really does come down to that. But if we can move very quickly on some of these things, certainly the review of minimum standards is essential. We see real issues with recruitment and retention for the sector. Some of that could be addressed quite quickly, actually, by addressing some issues in relation to that around the vetting procedures. It's taking months in some cases to get people working into the sector, and of course they're being lost then to other sectors. So that's absolutely that recruitment issue. At the last all-party group, we had Francis Lloyd from Giggles, and we put a slide from that in showing you. I think last year he lost the equivalent of 70 years of experience from their setting. That's obviously a huge challenge for quality, but also if providers are struggling with their staff costs, then it's going to be an affordability issue too. So if we could do that, removing the rates, I know that's quite topical at the moment, that's something that's going to be an issue for ministers. Almost what I'm saying there is it's all important, but if we could do that review certainly first, but we need to get money into the sector, and we need to do it quickly.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
I mean, I extended a bit of attitude with the questions as I had overlooked your indication, Kathy, so apologies on that. But if we could keep maybe to a couple of questions per member for the remainder of the session. So, Cara, you had indicated next.
Thank you, Chair. I just have two questions. Ladies, thank you both for being here today. It actually follows up from Kathy's point there. 105 million is an incredibly positive number, looking at supporting parents and benefits they don't know they're entitled to. Has there been any engagement with the department? Of course, since last week we had the incredible discussion around the urgent need for immediate support and for a childcare strategy. Has there been any discussion with them on doing a robust campaign to get it out there and to let people know that that's available to them?
I've been calling for this for a long time. And there has been some work done through the childcare partnerships, and they've done some work, and that's really important, and through the Family Support NI website. But we need more than that. We really do. Still, I think people are self-selecting out, as Mary said. They're thinking they're not entitled to something that maybe has the term benefits on it, or they think that maybe Make the Call is for older people or for people who maybe have a disability. We need something really targeted at parents. We need to go to where parents are and tell them, this is how easy it is to find out exactly what you're entitled to. Let's make sure you get that support.
Brilliant. Well, I can target that question then when they arrive in our next oral briefing. Hopefully we'll get some outcomes there. My next question and my final question is just around that wider conversation on the impact on parents. We know the financial pressures that this can create in the home, and I believe, I think we all believe it can particularly punish women in their aspirations, both from a career perspective but also attaining education. And for myself, I was a crash baby in the Korean University campus, where my mum was the first in her family to go and get a degree. And she always credited the team there, who, I really enjoyed the crash, and she got the ability to go and attain her degree. So I guess my question is, has there been any approach or engagement with yourselves and both university campuses and further education campuses across Northern Ireland, just to ensure that we can do all we can to ensure it's essentially a win-win? It helps, student development, it helps women, it helps early years development, and can offer a method of staff support as well for those working on campus. So just asking if there's any developments there.
We've been working with employers and because essentially they are an employer, so Queen's University and University of Ulster for many, many years, to encourage them and give them advice and guidance about how to set up either an individual creche on site or a consortium where they buy in places. So there are for students and for staff. It will and not only just at universities but at large schools and other employers. Because of the nature of it, there obviously has to be a volume of children who are going to it to be able to use it. And quite often parents want to have their childcare close to where they're we've seen this in America when I was out looking at that, but quite often they want to have the childcare close to their home rather than to their employment, because obviously then if they're off, the children have to still be brought into the employers section. But we would be I don't think there's anything currently that the team are looking at the moment.
What we are working
You're
is
working with the
yes.
CBI group?
Yeah, so working with the Northern Ireland Chamber and a number of local employers to look at if we could potentially pilot a workplace nursery scheme, which is what this would be known as. There are really significant tax exemptions actually for parents if they're able to avail of this through an employer. So the entire amount that they are paying for their childcare can be tax and national insurance free. So it's actually one of the most supportive schemes here. What we know, however, is that there's work involved in getting one set up. We want to see a toolkit put together so that any employer who wants to do this or to work with other employers to do it has a really good roadmap and knows what might be involved with it. But can I suggest, and maybe this is something for the department, previously, we did some work with Sue Gray when she was in post around the potential of using the Stormont estate, creating a workplace nursery here, making use of some of the really great facilities, and getting out of that also.
Sliding up here.
Yes, so maybe that's something that we could be actually looking at also, and getting a really good model put together, and then being able to support and encourage and financially incentivise and support and encourage other employers to do this and to do it in partnership. As Mary says, it won't solve the issues for everybody, but it might be really suitable in particular for parents who are returning to work after a period of parental leave, maybe for younger children. And we know there's some really good examples that we could bring to making sure that there's a really good pilot there.
Absolutely, and also obviously our team would make sure then that all of the parents who are using it and all of the users and the employers are getting the best possible advice and guidance about the tax incentives, as Eva said, and anything that can be used to help make it easier for that transition back from maternity leave or paternity leave back into the workplace.
Brilliant. I'm not a parent myself, but I know members across this house will certainly be grateful to hear of that. And it was really interesting just in the lead up to this doing some research about the different childcare methods in schools and stuff across places like Finland and Sweden. So it was definitely eye-opening. But no, thank you so much for your answers, because I would just hate to think that unaffordable childcare would, not allow someone to have that element of social mobility. So thank you so much for your answers. Cheers.
So 3 other indications. So Danny, and I would just ask everybody, just will be mindful of time, to have maybe 10 minutes remaining here. So
I'd be glad to know that Nick already asked my question, so I'll just give a wee view if that's okay. So I really want to thank you for the work that you are doing, especially what's going on in the all-party group. Suppose in 2010 when my daughter was born, the biggest shock I ever got was the cost of J-care, and my wife had to go back into work for her career after just 6 months. So we had to change our patterns. Everything that's on the reports and all the evidence, that was our life. And we had to plan everything out after that. They're like, if we had fell pregnant before a period when our son was born, I don't know if I'd be sitting here today, if I'm being brutally honest, because of the way our work patterns were. Had to wait till she was in school, and then another wee baby, and then we were very lucky with our provider. They work with us, the staff were brilliant, talking about at early intervention. They notice things. They're the ones around your child, and they become part of your family. And I'm really grateful to them, because when we had both of them going through it at the same time, the 2 boys, their generosity, they reduced our fees that they allowed us to afford it back then. And that was just pre-COVID. COVID had just hit, so it wasn't all that long ago. And it's sad that we're still in this predicament now, that people are still facing this, and it is a barrier to the women going to work, and it's not fair. And I still do have contact with that particular provider, and the one they flagged up to me not too long ago and they were really worried about was the 33 hours. And I'm glad you brought it up today, because they flagged that up, saying that has the potential to cripple their model. So I'm glad that was brought up, and I just want to put on record the thanks I have for the people who have helped raise my children with me as well. So it's so important. J-care is massive. So thank you.
I think, sorry, and I'm conscious of time. Actually, I think it's such a strong point there. These aren't just service providers. No. Actually, it's so much more than that. Early learning and childcare, absolutely, they're part of families' lives. They're part of local communities. There's local devastation when we hear of a provider unable to do that anymore, and it's a really difficult situation that they're being put in, that they're having to write out to people like yourselves, to parents whose children they have helped to raise, and really who they feel of as part of their family, and they're having to say, we can't do this anymore, or we will have to put your fees up to such an extent that you have to tell us you can't come anymore. That's an awful situation.
Robbie?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to actually commend my fellow members for the line of questions so far. It's been excellent, and lots of what I'd written down here has already been asked. But I just want to put on record firstly, thank you both for the work that you put in over many years in your path, Mary, and recently you've been a gem to work with, Aoife, in terms of the consultation you put in. But I think, I'm just going to say this, if you don't mind, I think what you've put together here is a fantastic offering, because you're treading ground that politicians don't tread, and that is being real about the problems that are here, that we can't transform this overnight, and we can't just offer out a full gambit to everybody, because you've already highlighted the sector isn't in a fit form to overnight provide the care and the facilities and the places for the people that are there, and we are in fiscally challenged times. So in terms of my question, I've just got one, Chair, is that you've made the case really well, and I genuinely love the pillars that you've got there, particularly around tackling disadvantage in the paper was really good. But given that we have many competing demands now, we've got your hospitals are creaking at the seams to break, and we've got a shortage in health workforce, we've got the full education sector which is under significant pressure. Has there been what we would probably call a return on investment report? And if there is such a thing as a return on investment type of thing, I know we've discussed some of them, tackling disadvantage, I imagine will be quite high up there, and women in the workplace, the gender imbalance, not just in terms of employment, but in terms of employment opportunities. Yeah. But I know as a politician, it's something that is really, really, really useful for having those very high level talks about where we're going to put our money, because I imagine, and what we've talked about many times, that there is a return on investment here.
Can I say, actually, that's a question that we have asked repeatedly for the costed options that we would hope to see from the department. You know, if we're doing a business case in our office, I think if anybody is, you would expect to say, this is what option A will cost, this is what it will get us, this is what the outcome will be, similar for option B. So we need to see that, you know, we need to see the options that are being costed. Does that include also a benefit analysis? Because it's absolutely essential. We know that whatever the investment is going to be, it is an investment rather than a cost. We will see a significant return. I think you'd mentioned competing demands. Of course, we know that this is a very difficult financial environment. But I'll come back to a few things here. That 40% figure, 43% I think it is, of our workforce who are parents with dependent children. So those are teachers, those are nurses, those are doctors. So health, if that's facing a staffing crisis, let's sort childcare. Teachers, if they're facing, you know, a crisis, let's sort childcare. This is such an underpinning infrastructure for all of those other sectors. We also know that if we get it right and focus on quality, children's educational outcomes are better. You know, we put in the briefing about that SEED study that's been done across the UK, a longitudinal piece of work. They're achieving more educationally. They're also, and international work has shown this, achieving higher incomes later in life. They're paying more into the tax system. Mental health is improved. We're addressing poverty. We're lifting families out of disadvantage. But the other thing that we're doing around this is we're going to make a point there.
And we're also identifying through this is able to identify children with special needs much earlier and provide the support. It's also able to identify children with special needs in a qualified setting with qualified professionals, which then leads to a quicker diagnosis and better outcomes for the children themselves.
The other thing I was going to say is, and just building on that, at the weekend we saw research that had been published in England that showed a direct link between a declining birth rate and parents attributing that to rising costs, including for childcare. We know that's a real issue for the future in terms of how we deliver our health infrastructure, how our health system can function, who's paying the taxes, who's going to be looking after us, with all of us in our older age. So that's where we see the real return on this for children, for our economy, for society, educationally as well, if that is the focus of this committee.
Just a really good answer, and thank you for that, because we do have an ageing population and the birth rate is dropping off. I just know that it's there. I absolutely do, and in reports it's been well picked out, and I think it's something we can use going forward. Thank you. Cheers. Thanks.
And Cheryl, you've been very patient. Everybody was really keen to get in early in this, so sorry. I maybe haven't caught everyone's eye at the right time, but feel free.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you so much. I have been a big fan and a follower of yours for quite a long time, especially the Childcare for All Charter. We had actually brought it within our council, so I think that the work that you do is fantastic. I really, really do. Childcare literally changes lives. And I think it's a fundamental, as you said, it's an infrastructure, it's a pillar, it's absolutely everything. So I know even within this committee we're so passionate and we want to get things done, you know, now if we could. Just a few questions in terms of the outreach service that you provide. Is there anything we could do as MLAs to promote that for you? Could you send us some material that we can get out? Because it's something I would love to see and promote, as I say, within my constituency, and I'm sure everybody else would be the same. You're very right. I speak to parents all the time who think they can get absolutely nothing because they're working, so it would be good to know what is available for everyone. Childminders, I think they're a critical pillar of the infrastructure of childcare provision. I know even through my own experience with childminders, they are feeling pushed out of the sector because of the increased regulations and the hidden costs that are associated, whether it's fuel or heating and the cost of living. You know, how can we support childminders better? Because they're one of the first protocols for affordable childcare, very affordable childcare, but they're being pushed out of the sector, and I am seeing that day and daily as well. So how can we support them better? And again, flexibility from employers. Are you seeing a change from employers? You've done this for quite a while now. Have you seen that improve? And again, what can we do better to help support employers and promote that? Thank you.
So certainly in terms of the Family Benefits Advice Service, and we can actually, they can do clinics within your constituency offices as well, webinars, any of those kinds of things, so we can send that through to the clerk. In terms of childminders, absolutely, they're a critical part of our infrastructure here. So all of our pillars, we see them as certainly being a core element of that. So any targeted or any subsidy or targeted subsidy needs to also be going to childminders. One of the things that we found, which was really quite stark in the most recent childcare survey, was 15% of parents said they were using an unregistered childminder. So it's illegal to provide those services unregistered, but it's unregulated. There's no assurances as to safeguarding, and actually parents often don't realise it can be the more expensive option because they can't get financial support with their costs. So if we can address that, I think we'd be doing something really significant to support registered childminders who are absolutely doing the right thing and are doing an amazing job with home-from-home settings. Definitely part of the review of the minimum standards, looking at what is the right approach for childminders. That's key. Flexibility from employers, I mean, that's been from the beginning really a key thing for you, Mary. And
yes, in terms of that, I think there is greater recognition now. One of the things that we've been trying to do is get childcare onto the boardroom agenda, and I think that is much more recognised now, and employees, staff are not afraid to go and ask for what they are entitled to in terms of flexible working and career breaks and things like that they may have not been able to access as freely in the past. I wouldn't say that it is across the board, certainly not, and I think there's always room for development and for improvement, but I would say that absolutely it is seen now as a need. It's not just a nice to have, it's flexible working, career breaks, as I say, and part-time working, and that I think is much more acceptable now, and there's less of a kind of a fear of asking, but I think there's still a long way to go.
No, I totally agree.
I think what's really powerful is that we've got an all-party group on education and childcare that is attended by the Federation of Small Business, by the Confederation of British Industry, by the Institute of Directors, by the Northern Ireland Chamber. All of those business membership organisations are putting this right at the top of their agenda, and their senior leaders came out, very shortly after the restoration to say what needs to be a day one priority. Childcare. They recognise this. It's critical for them. It's the point that we were talking about. It's those 88% of parents who are reducing their hours or considering leaving work. That's an issue for employers, but it's also the parents who are working. 95% of whom said childcare stress impacts on their productivity at work. That's massive as well. So when they're in work, they're really stressed about this, whether they're trying to jigsaw together the grandparents and the after school clubs or the nurseries or the cost of it. So that's an issue. They're seeing this. They're seeing more, I think we're seeing employers recognise it is just the right thing to do, but also when they're carrying, we put in the briefing, real skills shortages as well, 25% in some cases, so they're trying to recruit people into hard to fill vacancies. What are they going to do? If they can improve their recruitment and retention packages by showing that they're investing in childcare and family friendly and life friendly policies, that's only going to benefit them.
The very name just to finish off, the very name employers for childcare is spelt with a capital F, FOR, and it was set up to support employers supporting their staff with childcare, and that was kind of the premise of what we've been about and what we've been working for so many years. So I think we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go.
Well done. Thank you both for your time. We covered a lot of ground there. And I think just the breadth of the range of questions, from the economic aspects of this to the human impact and even the emotional impact on this for people, and I think the early educational benefits. There is just so much in here. So I think that's given us a lot to take forward in the weeks ahead. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to meet you. Thank you.
So I think before we move on to our next item, there was a proposal made by Kathy there. Would you be happy to take that forward into forward work planning, just to factor that in? But definitely we've noted that around the wider engagement with stakeholders on this issue. So My understanding is that for the next item, the departmental officials are now here, but we're going to just take a quick comfort break for 5 minutes, and then we'll move to that item. Okay. If we could just make sure the live stream is off there.
We did have it.
No, you're not. Everybody, it's me first. No, you haven't.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
You're definitely doing. No, being here before. This is my first video.
Members, so that's us back in public session. And we are just, the departmental officials are coming through, but that is us at item 6 on our agenda. I'll let the officials grab a seat there. So this is a departmental briefing, and introduce all the officials in a moment. If I could refer you to your briefing paper from the committee clerk, that's at page 65 of your papers, and to briefing paper provided by the department at pages 67 to 94, which I think is similar to what was provided for last week's. So I'm just going to introduce the officials. Yeah, that's fine. And there was a specific financial update provided also there in our tabled papers. That's at page 6. So there's a few bits to refer to there. So you're all very welcome here today. So I'll just go through who is here with us, but you can obviously introduce yourselves as we go through the presentation. So welcome back, Ronnie Armour, Deputy Secretary, Resources, Governance and Early Years. We have Neil Palmer, Interim Director of Finance with the department. We have Paul Brush, Director of Early Years, Childcare and Children and Young People Strategy. Andrew Scott, Director of Corporate Services and Governance, and Mark Bailey, the Director of Education Workforce. So it's a big panel, so thank you all for giving up your time. We have allowed for up to 10 minutes for an initial presentation, so I'm conscious with the numbers we have here that's not giving all of you a lot of speaking time, so I'm not sure if you've each planned to do a short presentation, but we'll aim for up to 10 minutes. I'll give a little bit of latitude on that, but to set out the sort of key issues that you want to bring to committee today, and then we'll move to questions. So over to you, and thank you again for your attendance.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the invitation to come and brief the committee today on the specific areas of our responsibility. The Resource Governance and Early Years Group comprises 5 business areas, and I'm going to take a few minutes just to briefly outline the work of each and update you on the key priorities. If I can begin with Corporate Services and Governance led by Andrew, to deliver on the vision that every child and young person is happy, learning and succeeding as set out in our corporate plan, Every Child, it's important that the department and its partner agencies and organisations function effectively and efficiently. My group's remit includes responsibility for governance arrangements within the department and oversight responsibilities for its NDPBs. The team provides assurance regarding the effectiveness of strategic planning, risk management, performance, including the delivery of the department's plans and any agreed programme for government or executive commitments, and obviously governance arrangements for our NDPBs. A key focus is sponsorship of the Education Authority and the delivery of the recommendations contained in the Landscape Review published in 2022. In addition, we're also responsible for the process leading to the appointment of school governors. Setting the context for the delivery of the department's vision is, of course, the budget available to deliver the wide range of education services for which the department is responsible. Whilst Neil, our Finance Director, will provide more detail, it's important to say that prior to the allocation of the additional financial package received from Treasury, the department's resource style budget for 2023-24 stood at 2.6 billion. This was 65.9 million less than the previous year, and until recently left the department seeking to manage a forecast overspend of just under 300 million. That's comprising approximately 147 million of unfunded pressures for the Education Authority and schools, and around 148 million, which is the estimate cost of settling 3 years of non-contractual pay awards. As the committee will be aware, the department has recently been allocated 296.8 million by the executive. The department clearly welcomes this allocation, which will allow us to meet our spending requirements this year and to open pay negotiations with those trade union partners representing teaching staff. And I'll say a bit more about that later. This funding does not, however, include implementation costs associated with the EA's preferred option to settle the pay and grading review for non-teaching staff, which is estimated to be in the region of 103 million to the end of the current budget year. And again, I'll return to this issue in a moment or two. Looking to next year, initial indications are that the department will require in the region of 3.4 billion. That's an increase of 524 million on our anticipated closing position this year. Of the additional 524 million, 253 million is required for incremental pay progression, the recurring cost of settling outstanding pay awards for teaching staff for 2021 to 2023, and the associated increase in employer pension contributions. An additional 68 million will be required for the estimated cost of implementing the pay and grading review in 2024-25, bringing the overall pay and grading review requirement next year to 171 million. A further 49 million will also be required for the anticipated cost of the NJC pay award for non-teaching staff in 2024-25. Those figures all contribute to the 253 million. In addition, the cost of special educational needs in 2024-25 are currently expected to increase by 42 million due to expected increase in demand. The 3.4 billion estimate for next year does not include a number of other transformation proposals and other proposals, including the cost associated with early learning and childcare developments. Those would be in addition. As the committee will know, around 90% of the total resource budget is spent on schools and pupils, with around 80% for staff costs. This leaves the department with limited realistic options in the face of a reduced budget, as was the case in the current year until the additional allocation was announced recently. Since 2010-11, per pupil funding is reduced in real terms by 14%, while pupil numbers have increased by 8%, and pupils with a statement of special educational needs by 75%. Investment in education has long-term social and economic benefits for all society, and it's crucial into building future prosperity. It must therefore be a key priority for us across government as we move forward. I will only speak today in this briefing about the resource budget. Capital budget is managed separately within the department, and colleagues will be here, I think, next week to talk to you in more detail about the capital position. If I can turn to workforce development team, here the staff led by Mark have policy responsibility for workforce issues affecting the education workforce and for pay, industrial relations and pensions. The payroll team provides an outsourced facility processing teacher salary payments, which amount to some 800 million per annum, and on behalf and under instruction from employers, the EA, the CCMS and schools in the GMI and Irish medium education sectors. The pensions team have responsibility for the policy and administration of the Northern Ireland Teachers Pension Scheme, comprising 44,500 active or deferred members and approximately 25,000 former teachers receiving pension benefits. The workforce team also provides sponsorship and oversight for the General Teaching Council for Northern Ireland and the preparation for legislation following its agreed dissolution and replacement. The committee will be interested to know that negotiations are underway with the 5 teaching unions to resolve the ongoing pay dispute and end all industrial action. 2 meetings have taken place so far, and a further meeting is planned for next week. The committee will understand that in view of the sensitivities, it would not be appropriate for me to go into the detail of those discussions. Regarding the position in relation to the pay and grading review for non-teaching staff, the department recognises the urgency of finalising the business case for consideration by the Department of Finance and is doing everything possible to do so. The Education Authority first submitted a business case to the department in February 2023, indicating a recurring cost of approximately 39 million. The department was not convinced that the business case arguments and costs had been fully articulated, and during the period from February to December, we worked with EA to ensure the business case was sufficiently robust to submit to the Department of Finance. On the 13th of February this year, EA colleagues advised us that they may have underestimated the number of staff impacted by the pay and grading review. So EA colleagues are currently working to resolve this issue to allow us to clarify the figures previously presented to the Department of Finance. As the committee is aware, the cost of implementing the EA's preferred option currently stands this year at 103 million, with a recurrent cost of 68 million. Prior to any further amendments from the ongoing work that EA is currently engaged in, we recognise the importance of finalising this issue and appreciate the frustrations felt by staff who provide such vital service in our schools. We will resubmit the business case to DOF as soon as possible and will bid for the necessary funding to implement the deal as quickly as possible in the incoming financial year. Turning to early learning and childcare, which is part of Paul's responsibility. The development of the early learning and childcare strategy is a key priority for the Minister, as he's explained in the Executive and indeed the Assembly. Its aims are to support child development and promote parental employment, ensuring that children get the best start in life and families are supported with the cost of childcare. The Minister has already outlined his ambition for the strategy both at the Executive and in the Assembly. In summary, he has outlined the following priorities and we are working towards these. The development of a Northern Ireland childcare affordability scheme to reduce the cost to working parents and support labour market participation. To narrow down the options and identify an approach which would deliver the range of policy outcomes we want to achieve in Northern Ireland. The Minister has indicated his intention to establish a task and finish group to an operational task and finish group with input from a range of departments to develop this work, and work is already underway to establish this group. Secondly, to establish the preschool education programme and commence rollout of 22.5 hours PSEP for all children aged 3 to 4. An independent scoping study on the state of readiness of the sector to transition to 22.5 hours is nearing completion and will inform the phasing and cost of implementation. Following completion of the scoping study, the Minister will bring forward a plan for implementation. Thirdly, to consolidate existing targeted early years provision to support children facing disadvantage and those with additional needs. The committee will be aware of the Sure Start Pathway and Toy Box programmes that provide targeted developmental support to the most disadvantaged children aged 0 to 4 in Northern Ireland. It will be essential to ensure that such existing provision is stabilised before any further expansion of programmes. Fourthly, enhanced services for children with additional needs and disability. Evidence shows an increasing number of children presenting with additional needs disability. Parents of these children often struggle to find appropriate early learning and childcare provision which is suitable for their child's needs. Increasing the availability of accessible provision therefore needs to be considered carefully within the strategy. And finally, Chair, the stabilisation of the early learning and childcare sector to address existing challenges and enable further expansion. Following significant engagement with the sector and findings from independent commissioned reviews, it is clear there is a real and urgent need to stabilise the childcare sector. This is a challenging programme of work, and the Minister has been clear that urgent progress is needed. Development and implementation will require time and significant budget commitment. As the Minister indicated in the Assembly, initial estimates suggest annual running costs could reach up to 400 million upon full implementation, subject to the strategy's scope and executive support across various proposed areas. And finally, Chair, if I can touch on the independent review of education. As you know, the review panel published the report on the 13th of December last year. It's an extremely wide-ranging document covering every aspect of education. Our first task is to assess and understand what has been presented and to consider the recommendations that have been proposed. To that end, we are currently undertaking a round of informal discussions and consultations to clarify any points in the report and to take stakeholder views on the recommendations. When that work is complete, a paper setting out potential options for implementation will be prepared for consideration by the Minister. It's anticipated that that paper will be available towards the end of April. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the summary of the aspects of my group's work. Thank you for listening, and we're more than happy to take questions.
Just making a note of everyone who's indicated there. I think I've got everybody. Look, thank you very much for that. Those introductory sort of remarks that hopefully frame the discussion. Conscious it's wide ranging, so the brief that's before us today, that there is an awful lot in it, and also conscious that to some extent the early years and childcare stuff sits a bit separate to sort of the wider budget bit, although we know the budgetary pressures on that are going to be significant. I'll maybe just pick up a couple of questions quickly, and I would ask if all members could try and keep their questions focused to questions and less introductory remarks. I'll focus on budget and pay issues, and then we'll see if we can try and cover the broad range of it. I want to discuss just first of all, you talked about sort of in the region of an excess of 500 million extra was required from the sort of position that we're in budget-wise this year. And you referenced specifically that some of that is for those recurring pay pressures and to deal with previous pay deals that were unfunded and that schools were having to manage themselves. To what extent, out of that sort of 580 something million, I think, did I get that figure? No, 524 million. Out of that sum, how much of that relates to pay pressures? And if it is not delivered in terms of teaching pay, how much of that then falls to schools in terms of what ends up? So what is the likelihood of this leading schools to be in further deficit? Because I think as a committee we're really conscious that the direction of travel on that regard is really not a healthy one, and that schools are now carrying deficits as the norm rather than the exception to the rule. And it feels like over the last number of years there's been, other than the little blip in COVID perhaps when we had extra money coming through, there's been really no major progress on stemming that flow. So it's just to get a sense of, if you don't get those that ask, what's the impact of school budgets on the ground, and what can we do to get budget into schools where it's needed so that we can see schools getting back on a footing where they're living within their means? Well,
the figures we're giving, Chair, is of the 524 million, 253 of that is recurrent, is incremental progression. So, you know, I think it'd be very difficult to pass that cost on to schools. I think we absolutely need to get that. But Neil, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, there's an ongoing exercise at the minute looking at what our need is for next year with DOF. And we're making it clear that we can't afford to settle for the last 3 years with the money that they've just given us to do that without a guarantee that we'll get recurrent funding going forward. And you're absolutely right, if we didn't get that money and we went ahead and settled and we couldn't find the money from elsewhere to fund the recurring costs, that would find its way through to schools and the EA, but it would be a big impact on schools. Now, the 253 is made up of a number of figures, just to be clear. 166 million of that is specifically for the recurring impact of a pay settlement, if we get one. There's also been a change to pension contributions, which is inescapable, which is about 40 million. And then also in there are smaller amounts to cover teachers' incremental pay, which they'll get no matter what. That's truly inescapable. And then we need to take account of the fact that there will be another pay settlement due in September 2024. We'll be straight back into it. There's about 35 million there for that. So those are all, if there's a pay settlement, those are all truly inescapable figures which we cannot afford to absorb. Now, I suspect that the Department of Finance will take the approach that all departments will need to be content that they can afford on a current basis whatever pay settlement they arrive at. So we're really stressing the point at the minute with DOF that that's not something that we can do.
I think it's really crucial. I'll just declare an interest. I do sit on a board of governors for a controlled primary school, but I know that across boards of governors, you know, they're all receiving the letters from the EA at the moment. You have to live within your means. You have to look at how you can cut costs. I think the sense is that schools have cut back just to the bone on this, and I don't think I'm certainly not aware of any major waste in the system. You know, when we hear from the NEHT last week at committee that we've teachers buying toilet roll and tissues for their classroom and then buying stationery. I don't think there's much to be cut. So I think it's really important we impress that money does need to be directed back to schools so that they can actually live within their means. It's not sustainable. Then the only other question I have, and I know you covered it on the pay and grading review. I had raised it with the Permanent Secretary last week, and I know you referenced that time sort of scale that went from February to December with the business case. I mean, I think there is impression that maybe that things could have moved faster with that. Obviously, we want what lands with the department to be right and to be accurate. Clearly, there seem to be issues with that, and I would just want to put a concern on record. Why business cases are going forward to finance that are then coming back potentially with inaccurate figures. And I think the unions and the staff in particular who are impacted by this, I think, will be rightly concerned to hear that even after this amount of time, how long this has been running, that we still haven't got clarity on those figures. So I think it's really important that we get this right, but we also get it right quickly. Permanent Secretary was at pains last week to emphasise, it's right to do things properly, and we want to. Of course, the committee would want the figures to be accurate. We're not saying otherwise, but staff have been waiting a long time for this. So it's really just what assurances we can get that this will be resolved, and it will be resolved quickly in terms of finalising the case. We understand the wider finance is a bigger question beyond that, but in terms of getting that business case finalised.
And we, Chair, absolutely understand the frustrations, and that's why I wanted to take time today to outline to you the time scale. I mean, you're right in saying that we have to be satisfied with this and we have to be able to stand over it, and the committee would expect that from us. We did send the business case forward in December. There are now issues around the figures that were contained in that. We will have to work through those. EA will and are at the moment working through the detail of that, and as soon as we in the department get those figures, I can assure the committee we will get that business case back to the Department of Finance. So I know it sounds a long time from February to December. A huge amount of work went in during that period to get the business case to the point where we felt we could stand over that and give it to DOF for consideration. Unfortunately, there's now been another issue in terms of the data which we need to resolve. But be under no illusion, we will do everything we can to do that as quickly as possible.
If I could maybe add, Chair, just very briefly. Without going into the detail, there's a raft of issues that we've have worked through. When you reference that 10-month period, it was back and forth. It's not like it sat with the department for 10 months. There's an awful lot of detail. But our main focus, just to reinforce what Ronnie was saying, daily we're involved with EA at the minute, seeking a rationalisation and a confirmation of the figures, because you understand the staffing costs are the primary cost when you come to pay, needless to say. The numbers of staff make the big difference. So we are pursuing it with vigour with EA, and I was talking to the EA HR director today. I happened to be in a meeting with him, and we will continue to do that. And as soon as we get, the Minister has given us a very clear direction, and when he met with the support staff unions, it was very clear and open with them. And we're meeting jointly, EA and ourselves, hopefully next week with the support staff unions to bring them up to speed with what's happening. And the Minister has given us a very clear purpose, if you like, of getting this bottomed out, getting the business case approved in order that he can bid to the executive for the funds in the next financial year.
Thank you. I think we could be assured the committee will be keeping a close eye on that from here. Deputy Chair, if you want to come.
Can I just endorse the remarks of the Chair? Irrespective of what is being said, and no doubt there's a lot of complexity involved in this business case, but it does appear to the ordinary man and woman in the street that there has been undue delay in getting this business case finalised. But anyway, that's all I'm going to say on that. The evidence shows that where children fall behind in their learning, without extra support, they have great difficulty catching up again. And the evidence also shows that where children leave school without qualifications, and I suppose children who fall behind at school are more likely to fall into that category, that where they leave without qualifications, they're more likely to end up unemployed, more likely to have mental health issues, chronic physical ill health issues such as obesity, diabetes and so on, more likely to end up in the criminal justice system. So I think when you bear that in mind and think of the cuts that were made last year when the financial pressures were bearing down on the department, cuts to the Engage programme, some cuts to extended schools, Healthy Happy Minds, programmes to help children with emotional and well-being issues, the digital devices, and I mean I could go on, the sports programme and so on. So I suppose my question is, and it appears we're moving into a difficult and challenging financial environment. Are we going to get any assurance from the department that if there are to be cuts again, they're not going to be aimed at the most disadvantaged and vulnerable children in society? Because those are the children who were most disproportionately affected by those cuts. And you've talked, Ronnie, about the education having long-term social and economic impacts for all of society. But if children aren't getting that education, particularly those ones who are having difficulties, the kids from dysfunctional families, the kids who have mental health issues, the kids who are going to school hungry. You know, you also mentioned about happy. What you want is a situation where children are happy, learning and succeeding. I mean, you can't be happy if you've faced adverse childhood experiences and you're not getting any help for it. You can't be learning if you're going into school hungry. And you can't be succeeding if you have fallen behind in your learning and you're not getting extra support to help you catch up again. So I suppose what I really want to know is, in terms of budget allocation, can we get any sort of assurance that if there are difficulties this year, that it won't be the most disadvantaged and vulnerable in our society who are going to suffer as a result of that?
Well, I think, first of all, the decisions that were taken last year were very difficult decisions, and in some of those cases, funding had come to an end.
Could I just stop you a second, Ronnie? Because we're in agreement here that there's no social advantage, there's no educational advantage, and there's no long-term economic advantage to making those cuts that were made. So, in my view, there's no justification for them whatsoever. But carry on.
Well, I'm simply saying the department was in a very difficult position. We've outlined the extent of the financial pressures that we were facing. The decisions taken last year were taken. I think they were taken with great regret. They were difficult decisions that fell to the department in the absence of a minister to make. In terms of next year, well, we haven't received our budget allocation yet. We've been asked to work on the basis of flat cash. We haven't made any decisions yet around what we will do in terms of the incoming year. Those decisions will have to be, and discussions will have to be had with the minister. But I absolutely hear what you're saying, and I understand the point that you're making.
Thank you.
Okay, Cathy, you'd indicated next.
Thank you, Chair. Paul, this is probably directed mostly at yourself, just around the childcare, and we've just heard from employers for childcare earlier, and we've heard, I suppose, about their fear about issues with the 33 hours and the impact that's had in England on the childcare providers. And they're very keen to know, is that something that the department understands and realises? Because they do have a bit of a fear around the delay on the cost of options and where that is. But something specific that I wanted to ask you was around, I noticed on the papers around the budget and the childcare strategy, and it's basically saying up to, I think it's 370 million for the childcare strategy, but 50 million if that would be required for the early stages. I was just wondering if you could expand on what that 50 million would be for initially, and then when the rest of the money would have to come into play.
Yep, I'm happy to. In terms of, do we understand and are we aware of the huge difficulties with rolling out the 30-hour offer in England? Absolutely. Both from all the publicity that there's been about it, but also from direct contact with providers and representative groups in England. It's a complex sort of story. It's hard sometimes to disentangle the implementation difficulties with the sort of difficulties with the model. I think there are problems with both. So we're very much aware of this, and the Minister has already said in the Assembly that, you know, he's looking at all the options. He's aware of the different approaches supply side, demand side, and he just wants time to understand all of those. And, you know, we've had some initial discussions with him on that, but he also wants to hear from people at the coalface, so he will be coming to visit and meet with the Stakeholder Engagement Forum as a group, but he's also accepting a lot of invitations from different groups that want to talk to him about this. So he is aware, as are we, of the issues around the 30-hour offer, so it's certainly something that we're alive to. In terms of the budget, the figure of 400 million, I think, that he put out in his debate is sort of where you might end up after you had done everything on a recurring basis. Now, some of those things will be things like the standardisation of preschool to 22.5 hours, and it will take a number of years for every preschool to be able to move to that. So clearly you wouldn't need all your budget for some time. The 50 million for next year is an estimate of what we would require to do really 3 things, some smaller things too, but 3 main things. One, a stabilisation piece, and it goes to the point that was made earlier around the cuts, or even the threat of cuts, to be honest, that had such a destabilising impact on the early years sector. As it, in the end, there were not cuts to the early years programmes like Sure Start or Pathway, but there was a real threat of that for a number of months. A lot of the workers basically left the sector or found other jobs. There is a precarious state that it has left a lot of those providers in. So one of the things that 50 million would do would be to really, I suppose, stabilise and consolidate what we have there. The second thing would be around some form of interim measure. The Minister has made it clear that doing the full integrated strategy will take time, but that he's very aware of the current pressures that both providers are under and parents are under. So it would be around bringing forward some sort of interim easements on those 2 fronts.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. I just have 2 quick questions. One is with regards to the school holiday food grant scheme. I'm mindful it would give £13.50 and it ended March of last year. And we know that child poverty is still so prominent here in Northern Ireland, with 1 in 10 children sadly facing poverty, and a huge aspect of that is food poverty. I'm mindful any reinstatement of that grant would require executive agreement and associated funding, but can you give any assurances here today to parents listening that this might be something that will be discussed?
I can't give any assurances that it's something that's going to be funded at this stage, but it's definitely something the department's looking at, whether it would be taken forward, if it was to be reinstated, whether it would be taken forward by DE or another department. I know that I think it's DFC are looking at it as part of their welfare reform package, but we couldn't give any assurances, but definitely we have a team in the department that have raised it and it's under consideration.
That's something I can follow up on. And then lastly, just in the previous sitting there, we had a briefing from Employers for Childcare, and they had talked about the really positive aspects of their family benefits advice service, with over 105 million being afforded to parents who didn't know initially what they were entitled to. Just bearing in mind, that's, I think, hugely positive. Could we get a commitment from the department this is something that they could profile or campaign or share on their social media sites to enable parents to know what they're so rightfully entitled to? That would greatly alleviate the costs that they're currently facing, I think.
No, absolutely. Like, the first thing we have to do is to make sure people, as far as possible, are claiming what they're entitled to, and we have worked with Employers for Childcare to profile what's available. We've also worked with the Department of Health because they regulate all the providers and all the settings. So through almost trying to go at parents but also at providers, so that providers are registered to be able to offer all of that's available, and then that they also let their parents know. So if you have a child in a daycare setting, we were encouraging that daycare setting to tell the parent, you may be eligible for. So in fact, there's been some success through that programme in that we now have a much higher uptake of tax-free childcare, for example. In fact, the increase in Northern Ireland has been greater than in other regions. It's still not nearly high enough. So absolutely happy to commit to ongoing engagement that tries to improve that uptake as much as we possibly can.
So that's a commitment then that you'll
Yes,
you'll
absolutely,
brilliant.
absolutely.
No,
Yes.
that's it. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for clarifying those points. And I'll follow up with the department on the food grant scheme as well. Thank you, Chair.
Cheryl, you'd indicate.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for that there. In terms of financial constraints, I know one of the schools in my constituency area actually has a dramatically high level of staff retainment. So that obviously is putting an increased pressure on their budgets because the staff, they're obviously fantastic and they want to stay there. Is there any additional support that is going to be available for schools like that that benefit from a low staff turnover, and it obviously is having a dramatic effect on their budget and how they manage going forward? That would be the first question. You just mentioned there as well about interim easements for the likes of childcare strategy. Do you have any indication about a time frame? I know that's a difficult question, but I suppose from us, and even with Employers for Childcare, who just spoke previously, this has been something that has been campaigned for 25 years plus. It's very frustrating. I think everybody's off the same hymn sheet at the moment. We want to see action and we want to see something feasible, not in another 5-10 years. We want to see something now. So does the department have any time frame of any adjustments that are going to happen to ease the pressures on parents?
Take your first question first in relation to the school. And there are many schools, I think, in the same situation. So I suppose, the honest answer is there's nothing specifically to target that. But we absolutely appreciate the staffing pressures there are. We do appreciate the pressure on school budgets. I think we need to see what our budget is. We need to work through that and see where we are. If you want to add anything.
Yeah, I think it's fair enough. It's something we're aware of, and my colleague Mark will be aware of it as well. And it's something that we could look towards maybe as part of a transformation bid. But at the minute, it's not something we've really developed fully.
Yeah, I think it's just no school should be punished for retaining staff. I think that's part of it, So if be keen to keep that on the radar for them as well.
In terms of the time frame for the easements, like as I said, there's two time horizons. There's the longer term, but conscious, as just you've said, people don't want to be waiting 4 or 5 years because of the immediate pressures. The Minister has asked us to consider what could be done in this coming year. Now, it won't be done overnight. We need to there'll be a process that'll have to be put around it. We'll need to be assured of that the business case stacks up across these different dimensions. But certainly there is work progressing to consider what could be put in place as an interim measure. We equally, I suppose, want to try and use that as an opportunity to learn for the longer term, so that you don't just put something in place that isn't actually helping to inform the destination. So there is work commencing around that. The Task and Finish group that Ronnie mentioned across departments that we're hoping to set up within the next 2 or 3 weeks, that will be one of their key objectives, to look at that, because a lot of the outcomes that this would aim to deliver certainly touch on the remits of other departments. So the whole affordability, the employability, the routes out of inactivity, all of that, we need input from other departments, not least in building the case and helping design whatever the measure would be.
No, that's great. I think it's good to see that there's progress and an intent from everybody to get this moving. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. If you knows me, I've got 3 questions and I'll ask them in as short form as possible, but they kind of interlink. So the first one is in regard to the update that you've given us on the pay and grading blockage, and I'm kind of disappointed with it, because most of us will have asked questions over a period of months and recognised that it was with the EA, with the department, and with the Department of Finance. The rationale that's been given causes me some concern, and it also causes me some concern in regard to some of the information that the department gave last week. So I would have expected that either the department or EA at the push of a button could tell me how many people were employed, either teachers or support staff or bus drivers or classroom assistants. And given the fact that the paper tells us with pretty accurate detail the finances of how much everything costs, so for instance teachers' wages, there's a line in here that says approximately 20,000 teachers, and that's £1.3 billion. But surely our report should be able to say we have 19,364 teachers employed today. That changes on a daily basis. And if we as a committee are going to be effective and to give confidence and work with the department, I'm going to be honest, the fact that the business case has failed on a point where the quantum of people who are employed wasn't established disappoints me. Now, I don't know whose fault that is. It could have been what was presented. I don't know. But if you could speak to that. And then that leads me into the second question, which is one of the recommendations from the independent review, which talks about, well, so it's like education we know is like this onion, multiple layers. So you've got the department, you've got the EA, then you've got your management bodies, your sectors, and it's far too complicated. And one of the recommendations is a single entity of some form, so some single umbrella. Has any work been done on that to establish what savings could be made for reinvestment? Not savings to go back to Westminster, but savings for reinvestment to improve the performance. And then the third one is the department repeatedly in the last mandate convinced us, if you like, that per head or per pupil we're underfunded. And that's a metric that I still have not got my head around. So as parties, I think we're all agreed that Northern Ireland is funded below need. And if the department is saying that education in Northern Ireland for our children is similar, is there a metric that I can get my head around, or this committee can get their head around, to understand that if the same metric that is used in the mainland was applied here, what that top line quantum would be? Thank you.
If I can start with the pay and grading review. I absolutely understand the frustration, and I can't disagree with you. I mean, when we sent the business case to DOF in December, felt that was the final version of it. EA have subsequently raised a concern about the numbers that they provided. We're working through that, Robbie, to try...
Ronnie, to be fair, you would know from your background that your previous role is in the prisons, and mine in the foreign prisons, that the establishment officer in any of those establishments could have given that figure fairly readily.
I can't disagree with that. I mean, I don't know if you want to comment further, Mark.
Just comment briefly, Robbie. I mean, you mentioned teachers there. Actually, the issue with this isn't around the teachers, because we could push a button today and tell you how many teachers there are. That's not a problem. It's the systems and the complexity of the support staff employment arrangements. Those staff are all employed by the EA across a wide variety of contracts. A lot of temporary staff, a lot of in and out, particularly with this development or the needs around SEN. There was a massive increase 2 or 3 years ago, and it continues in terms of, and the difficulty around paying the staff and keeping them. Now, I agree with you and Ronnie. I would have thought you could push a button, but it appears it is not as simple as that. And that was why a couple of weeks ago the EA really contacted us and said they thought they had underestimated the basis of the case, and that's what we're following up with them every day now. So we totally recognise your issue, but it comes down to, I think, a recording and a systems and a complexity issue that they're trying to resolve urgently.
If I could just come in there, I think that speaks to the need for the pay and grading review to be delivered, because the whole employment structure for these staff is so complex, and it feels like it's a legacy from the old education and library boards that has never really been properly aligned to the new EA structures. So that to me just speaks to the need to get this right now. We can't continue with this sort of scenario with these staff. Roy?
If I could just build on that quickly, just with 2 points in the wider sense. Certainly that is an issue that we need to tackle in terms of data quality that comes through from the Education Authority and then on from ourselves as well. And it was something that was picked up as part of the landscape review, and that is something that the EA are keen to work on or making progress on as well, including the systems that Mark has mentioned as well. One of the other aspects they're looking at under the landscape review is the HR services, and that will include then looking at the forms of contracts and the services that they're providing to schools to make sure that they get the right people in the right places at the right time as well. So just on the wider point on that, Chair, if I may.
If we can turn to your second question around the independent review and the cost of the single entity, as you put it, we haven't done the costing exercise in terms of the recommendations of the independent review yet. We're working through the detail of the recommendation. We're consulting with stakeholders and internally, but that will have to be costed in due course, but it hasn't been completed yet. And I think your third question was about per pupil. Neil, do you want to?
Yes, I was just desperately looking through my notes to see if I had a metric for you. I don't, but we can certainly provide you with something. It's been an ongoing issue and it goes up and down, but compared to other jurisdictions within the UK, our per pupil funding is below those jurisdictions.
Yeah, I think it'd be useful at the moment because we've got a common language that we're using as politicians in terms of how Northern Ireland in its entirety is funded. And education, and for our young people, that's obviously of primary importance. And in terms of establishing that argument with Treasury in Westminster too, that if it's something we can stand on, I think it's useful. But obviously we have to get our efficiencies, and I think that middle question is important given the first question, how something, if it's not right here, you know, it displays to me the complexity of the education system, which is not conducive to efficiency and effectiveness. And there's no fault attached to any of the departments. It's just multi-layered, and you can make mistakes in there. So,
can I just ask then on behalf of the committee that we get that information provided to the committee, and I think how per pupil spend is broken down. You know, what sort of streams of funding actually go into creating that figure. It would be really helpful to get a clear
we have it. It's very
breakdown on
different across the jurisdictions, so it's a difficult comparison to do. But we have done it, so we have that stuff. So we'll share that with.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've indulged 3 questions from Robbie. We have three further members looking to come in. I'm really conscious I want to leave time to look at forward work planning to make sure there's a few things we need to make sure we get right on that. So I'm going to bring Kate in. I've just asked everyone to be succinct. No preambles. Questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. Unsurprisingly, I'm going to ask some questions around childcare, and I welcome the Minister's priorities which you've laid out. I also welcome his responses to my many questions. So I'm going to try and ask some slightly different ones to ones that have already been answered. The first thing, Ronnie, you had mentioned about expanding, consolidating existing provisions. So affordability scheme is brilliant. Standardisation of preschool, which is not childcare but is a second priority, is brilliant. Consolidating existing provision is so important. I know the Minister met with Sure Start yesterday. If they don't get the 10% uplift that they have asked for, it's going to cost places, purse and services. If I really want to reinforce that as strongly as possible. They provide crucial support within our society and they really need that uplift. If you could give me any update on that as my first point. And then secondly, we know that we need a childcare strategy. We need to get the right models in place. It's great that you're costing different options and I look forward to seeing the costed options. But we know that staffing, recruitment and retention is such a problem at the moment. And with the increase in minimum wage next month, which is really welcome, parents are going to have to shoulder that cost. I wrote to the Minister this week and he responded. I know he acknowledges it, but he said he's going to be meeting with providers and parents in the coming weeks. I'm just concerned that we don't have weeks. So I appreciate that the long-term childcare strategy, is going to take a bit more time to get the right option that is right. We need to have an evidence-based strategy in place, but people need urgent support now, and we just don't have weeks. Next month, we're going to see more providers closing. A constituent got in touch with me to say their bills have gone up £120 just this month, and the ramifications that's going to have are huge. So Sure Start and urgent support. Which you probably should have just said to start with. Sorry, Chair.
My colleague took heed of my request for the preambles, but I think crucial questions.
Yes. Well, look, the whole stabilisation piece is all around trying to redress some of the damage that has been done. I can't give any guarantees about the level of uplift or anything like that, but you're absolutely right. The Sure Start managers have made their case very forcibly, and it just, we're making the case, the Minister very aware that unless you stabilise the foundation, you just it would be foolhardy to try and push forward because of that second point that you made, which is linked, which is the workforce and the lack of both availability and the ability to retain people and the competition with other sectors. So in terms of the need to do something quickly, yes, the Minister's aware of that. The potential of doing something before the beginning of April, I think I would want to manage expectations around that. But there is clearly a need to appreciate the implications of that across the sector. Now, it's a complicated picture because we know that in a lot of settings they're already paying above the minimum wage. So every setting will not be equally impacted by this. Therefore, it can't really be a one-size-fits-all approach. So those are the sorts of things we're looking at the moment. And yet, perhaps others are at that level, so they will both incur the increase in their minimum wage and in maintaining differentials throughout their pay bill. So that's a factor. This is back again to the Task and Finish group. We need the input of other departments on a question like this. Like, we have discussed this to some extent with the likes of the Department for the Economy, which has the minimum wage within its wider sort of orbit. There are clearly implications across a range of sectors. So anything we would do here, we have to ensure that there are not knock-on implications to other parts of the economy. So this will be one of the first things that group will be looking at. So I can assure you that it's on the agenda of the Task and Finish group.
The Task and Finish group include then the different departments.
Absolutely.
As well as stakeholders. The
Task and Finish group will be a departmental group.
Okay.
The Minister has also indicated that he may well want to reform the way stakeholders input to the process. So we will probably want a smaller, more focused group of stakeholders that will input directly to the work of the Task and Finish group.
That would be really welcome. Yeah.
But the Task Finish group really is about getting economy, communities, health. DAERA have expressed an interest, Justice have expressed an interest, but the departments who see a childcare strategy as directly contributing to their ability to meet their policy objectives, actually providing substantive staff resource to work up these options.
Thank you.
I think you've highlighted that it's complex. It's undoubtedly complex, and an immediate response to deal with the pressure is complex. But I think I would want to emphasise, and I think from our briefing from Employers for Childcare, the committee would want to emphasise this must not be complex for the providers. Whatever scheme is rolled out, it should not be cumbersome, difficult to access, or administratively burdensome. This support is needed to be delivered quickly. So when it's ready to go, the sector need to be able to access it and quickly. I think that's really clear.
With obviously an element of process that ensures that we maximise the purpose for which the investment is intended, and that adds the complexity. Yeah.
I understand that. So two members just looking to come in. I'm just going to emphasise we were straight to question territory here. So Danny, please.
Thank you, Chair, and you'll be glad to know a couple of my questions were already asked. So I've only got two. I was just wondering, does the department plan to address the issue of supernumeracy pupils in the school, because it's causing schools to be overstretched and leaves children with special educational needs out of the enrolment from the start?
Well, that's not strictly within the remit of this group. So, I mean, I think the department will work to try and achieve what is best, but I can't give you any sort of detail or assurance on that. You're not aware of anything.
I'm not briefed to answer that, but we can certainly find it for you and come back to you.
Yeah.
Maybe the same on the next question. I was just thinking about, is there any plan for a publishment of an inclusion policy and strategy related to special educational needs?
Again, that will fall to the special educational needs team. I think are here in a fortnight, but we will certainly get you. We'll get you that information.
No, that's fine. I'll keep the questions fair. That's fine. Thank you.
And David.
Sure, thank you. And like Danny, I think one of my initial questions was dealt with in the answer to Kate, and I think that sort of Task and Finish group seems to be dealing with what I was going to ask around quantifying the benefit across the different departments to ensure that an investment is we recognise the sort of cost benefit analysis of any investment. But one point, I've only one other question, but just to make a point, and it's piggybacking, I guess, on what Cara had said, and that campaign. You can make sure that campaign, as well as being a public campaign, is very much targeted internally as well within the Northern Ireland Civil Service, being one of our biggest employers, but also within the wider public sector, or understanding the pressures that those workers face to ensure that they're drawing down whatever they need, that every little helps.
Yeah.
And if we can do that through those channels. The other question I had, and it may be similar to Danny's in terms of the more aimed at SEN, but it's more to do with teacher training as well. Having visited a couple of local special schools last week, and you talked about sort of the workforce pressures that they were facing. One of the things they said that would make a difference to them is mainstreaming an element of SEN training for all of our teachers to increase the sort of bank of teachers, but also if they had experience within a special school setting, they may feel more comfortable and less intimidated by that environment, and therefore be more willing to take up posts or to be a temp in those schools where and when they need it. Has the Department or the Minister given any consideration to what we could do around that to sort of mainstream that kind of training for our teachers?
That's not within SEN's not within our brief, so I wouldn't really want to get into the detail on that, but we'll come back to you on it, David.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Just some of those issues around SEN, we can be picking up, I think, hopefully next week. So yeah, we'll note those for next week. I think that brings us to the conclusion. So thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. It's a wide-ranging brief that you've brought us today. So thank you for your time. But plenty of issues that we'll be continuing to follow up on. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Just in terms of any agreed actions there, could you, Clark, just confirm what we had agreed? I think there was some written correspondence we're going to seek or hope to receive back from the department on the back of that.
Yeah, so there's going to be some follow-up in respect of different questions that weren't answered. Some of them have been referred on to next week's briefing and the following week's briefing, so anything to do with SEN will be addressed at next week's briefing, and then infrastructure and capital at the following week's briefing. But for instance, Kate's question about the question about per pupil funding wasn't answered. The department really should have material on that to give us the difference between the different jurisdictions, and the department's going to provide that. And then Kate asked for the costed options in respect of childcare. It doesn't sound like those are necessarily ready yet, but I think it's important to ask for them.
Yeah.
And also measures for retention and urgent support now in respect of the childcare sector. The question that Danny put then about overstretching to do with numeracy.
Supernumeracy.
Supernumeracy. Okay, so in writing as well. And then the SEN question that you put, would you like to do it in writing, or shall we just leave it until next week?
I'm happy to wait the next week and ask them
questions.
Yeah,
for Lindsay and her team next week. And then similarly, David, mainstreaming SEN teaching to increase capacity. Are you happy to do that next week? Is there anything else, members?
Sorry, I maybe missed the beginning, but Cheryl's question about a timeline for the childcare strategy, was that answered?
Well,
I would like to see one written out. Exactly when we can even expect the task and finish group to finish what they're doing, when we can expect consultation, all the different parts to it. So they touched on it, but it wasn't clear.
No, there was a commitment to particular actions in this first year with that £50 million, but there wasn't anything.
We need a
beyond
timeline
that.
for full delivery and implementation.
Yeah. Maybe members, you would also like actually just the questions that employers for childcare clearly put to go in the correspondence and get those answers. Does that sound reasonable?
So Kate's point is very important, because the emails that we're receiving from constituents are no longer, what are you doing? Our constituents are now emailing saying, you have to do something, breaking point, and so the balance between getting it right or doing something. You made a good point, to be fair, Kate. What can we but to be fair, what can we do now? Because if like Birdies in Lisburn, for instance, closing 60 families, and the capacity doesn't exist within Lisburn already, so what happens then? And that burden just gets stretched further and further. So doing nothing isn't an option.
Yeah. And I think that was clear in the presentation. There was, again, that focus. So this is in terms of an immediate piece of assistance. It's complex, and no doubt it is, but families can't wait sometimes for that complexity to be unravelled. And we saw during COVID that, and I think Aoife referenced that in the Employers for Childcare presentation, we were able to get support out and do it quickly. So let's hope we can do so with this. And I think we should keep that pressure on the department. Sorry, Kate, do you want to?
No, I was just going to say I did speak to early years who administered the COVID payments, and they said they could do it again. So there already are structures in place,
And that's probably worth highlighting even in correspondence that structure is there. Yeah. Okay. Thanks to everybody for your questions. I think those were two really useful and constructive sessions. Just moving to forward work programme there. You'll have that in your packs, and that's, I think, an updated one at page 8 of the table papers, isn't that right? Aoife, let me just, Aoibhinn, sorry, let me just get to that.
It is indeed, yeah, page 8.
Okay, so I have to say, in terms of what's set out there, largely happy, but I think there's going to be a few bits of detail that we need to raise, and we do need to go back to Kathy's proposal as well around the wider stakeholder engagement on childcare. So looking at next week's session, I'm conscious that it's a big session. There's a lot in there, and it's certainly going to be a task to get that done on time. But I think that it's a coherent session with the Children's Commissioner, the Law Centre, and then the department on wider education policy. But I would imagine there'll be a clear focus on SEN. Our members agreed that is a session we can all sort of sign up to for next week's. Happy? No concerns on that. I know there's a lot in there, but for the following week.
I just before you go on, Chair, in terms of the informal meeting, is that the non-teaching unions on Tuesday?
Actually, the committee agreed earlier to take them in the main meeting rather than in an informal meeting, and I think that's the preference. Actually, I've had a bit of correspondence in the background too.
I wanted to get and thanks for raising that, Deputy Chair, because I wanted to come to that. I saw they were in the informal meeting one, and I was mindful that I think the teaching unions, the non-teaching unions may have preferred a formal briefing. That said, agenda's pretty full over the next while, and it's just making sure that they're aware that it might put it forward. Bring that.
It might be after recess.
We could bring it forward by an informal briefing, but otherwise it could be after recess. But we can take a steer from them as to how they feel about that. But I think given the issue, and given what we've heard today from officials in relation to the non-teaching staff pay and grading review, I think those unions have every right to expect to have a hearing with this committee in terms of those issues, because that was incredibly disappointing, I have to say, that we seem to have wound back to February 2023, which is a full year from when this first landed with the department. So I think we do owe them the opportunity to have a forum on that. The week following that, which is week commencing the 11th of March, we have an induction session in there around public finance scrutiny, which I think would be helpful. And then from the departmental side, we have the department in around sustainability and infrastructure, and there'll be a focus on capital investment there. We've already referenced that around the Fresh Start issues at the correspondence end of the agenda, so I think there's hopefully quite a lot there. In terms of the stakeholder engagement there, I'm conscious there's probably two sectoral bodies, and I think Clark and I had discussed this, that might be immediately want to come in on this around the capital investment side, and I'm thinking that's either in the integrated sector or the Irish medium sector. So does committee have a view of whether there's any particular stakeholder we think would be a good fit to speak to that set on the agenda? I mean, I'm happy to hear views.
Chair, I think some of the Irish medium, some of the organisations in the Irish medium sector, Corleana Gael Scully out there, or Ian Tevis,
I'm happy to propose that if we're...
Which week are we in charge?
We're in week commencing 11th of March. Okay. And it's in your table papers as well, so it is an updated forward work plan there. Which is
the table papers as well?
Yeah, the table papers is the updated one.
Would it be possible to invite principals, from different Irish-speaking medium schools? Yeah.
I'm happy to cast the net as wide as the committee wants to. I'm aware there's the QUB research around those particular pressures in the Irish medium sector, and I think if we could have a session allowing any stakeholders in that space to speak to that, I would welcome that. Yeah. Are we agreed?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. I'm also conscious there, just noting on that week commencing, we do have a written update scheduled there around the Integrated Education Act action plan. I would like to see maybe, and I appreciate it would be after recess, really just for noting. If members are in agreement, I think it would be good to hear from the integrated sector just where we're at with that action plan as well, because I know that the consultation on that is closed, so it'd be good to know where the department's at. But that's really for noting for future. It's on the 18th of March, so that is the week, and apologies for my confusion on dates earlier in the meeting. I was looking at the week commencing date when I read 18th of March, so thanks David for picking that up. We don't want anyone tuning in hoping to hear from the Minister and to be bitterly disappointed on the 18th of March. So for that week commencing the 18th of March, we have the Minister confirmed. Clark, can you confirm where we're at in terms of the mental health champion? Is that looking like something we can secure for that?
That isn't confirmed yet. Now we did get the Minister's confirmed, and the who's the other person? Yeah, the Children's Commissioner. We were pleased to confirm to give them kind of their priority in the work programme. But no, that isn't confirmed with the mental health champion. If you wanted to have something else in there, we've agreed this morning though to have the Senior Student Union and the Youth Forum and potentially Diverse Youth NI and some other youth groups.
I think
in that
whatever
next space. So
whatever
with the Minister, that might be a lot.
stakeholders from the children and young person sector that we can get in there, I think that would be good. And if we drop the mental health champion to another week, and if they're not available, but I think to have them all there, I think that feels like a really good fit.
Super. I just thinking because the Minister's coming in, and I know it's in for later, but possibly maybe even bumping Youth Work Alliance up, so we just everyone will have a good sense of what's going on in the youth provision sector.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm gonna be my feeling is that in terms of the amount we have on the formal agendas, and I know from having engaged with Youth Work Alliance before, they have an awful lot of information they want to share, and I think it's important we actually get a handle on it. Perhaps an informal stakeholder event. I don't want them to feel like they're being bumped out of an opportunity, but if you think it's good to hear from them early, there is scope there to do that.
I was thinking about questions for the Minister.
Yeah.
I mean, I can check the availability of all of those groups, and I've already asked, can we get a bigger venue if we want to have such a big bunch of people in for that session. So I'll come back to you with a bit more detail.
Factor that in. That's fine. So that week looks like that's set up, and then that takes us into recess, and we can in our future meetings we can maybe start to forecast things beyond recess.
As time goes on, you'll have fewer induction items as well,
Yes.
but I think the two raised ones about financial scrutiny will be really, really helpful. So it's great to have them in.
I wanted to check. We have a couple of gaps in the informal stakeholder slots. Now they don't have to be filled as a matter of course, but is there
There's a
anybody?
list at the bottom,
Yeah.
if you-
So we've got the list. So you're happy to? Are members content with that list at the bottom of those informal stakeholders? That those are just worked through and factored in as and when. And I would just encourage members to go through the clerk to
add
add
stakeholders,
stakeholders for those at any time. I think the wider we can hear evidence, the better for the better it will inform the committee's work. Members content with forward work plan?
Good.
Agreed. Take that forward from here. That's great. Okay. So that just takes us to item 9 of any other business. Do any members have any other business?
Sarah, did you want to say about?
Oh yeah, just about last week. So last week I had the opportunity at Ulster University to attend their Chemistry Day exhibit, which was essentially PGCE students who are trying to make primary school classes fun and do a bit of chemistry. So essentially it was you had the opportunity to walk around and see the different exhibits and learn, especially for children with special educational needs, using sensory play to teach about chemistry and melting ice and turning it into steam and these kinds of things. And it was really interesting to go around and learn, but they'd also touched on some of the challenges at the minute of trying to find chemistry teachers for secondary schools. And then it was really interesting to get an insight into life as a PGCE student and the complexities there as well. But yeah, that's pretty much a brief summary, and I think it's interesting about trying to get more women into STEM as well, which was a conversation.
And great you were able to represent the committee at that, and I think there are a lot of issues around the science provision and science provision more widely, which we can pick up. So that is great. That takes us to item 10, which is just date, time and place of next meeting. So the next committee is scheduled to meet on Wednesday the 6th of March, and that's at 2 p.m, room 29, Parliament Buildings. That just leaves me to ask that members agreed that the committee does now adjourn.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Girl in the dark room now.
I have Committee Room 29, sound. Committee Room 29, Sound.